Yo, what's good, fam? Today, we're diving into 7 wild Reddit stories that had me like, no way that actually happened. First up, my roommate stole my idea, so I turned the tables and exposed him. Bro, that's some next level betrayal. Then we got my college trip went horribly wrong, and I almost didn't make it back. Sounds like Final Destination. Dorm edition? Next, I was ignored and undervalued by everyone until I proved them wrong. Classic underdog arc. We love a glow up moment. And then there's my ex tried to ruin my life, but karma had other plans. Honestly, every Redditor's ex deserves an award for being unhinged. And hey, if you want to skip around, timestamps are below and in the description so you can jump to any story you want. Anyway, we've got a bunch more insane stories lined up, so grab your snacks, vibe out, and let's roll into story 1. My roommate stole my idea, so I turned the tables and exposed him. I never thought betrayal could come wrapped in laughter, pizza boxes, and shared playlists, but that's exactly how it started. My name's Steve Carter. I'm 22 and I lived with a guy named Jake Matthews in a tiny off-campus apartment in Austin, Texas. At first glance, Jake was the kind of roommate everyone wanted. Funny, charming, social as hell. The guy who could walk into any room and make friends before you even had time to finish introducing him. We met during freshman year at a hackathon event, bonded over our shared obsession with tech startups, caffeine, and terrible memes. And by sophomore year, we decided to split rent on a place near the university. Back then, I thought I'd scored the jackpot of roommates, someone who balanced my quiet, coding-heavy energy with his extroverted, outgoing personality. We became a solid team, the kind of duo people joked would definitely end up founding $1 billion app. And for a while, that joke didn't feel too far from reality. I was the code brain. Jake was the mouthpiece. It was a symbiotic friendship that worked perfectly until greed and ego slithered their way in. It started on a random Tuesday night. I remember because I'd pulled my third all-nighter that week debugging a prototype for this idea we'd come up with. A campus networking app we called Link Up. The concept was simple but powerful. Connect students to part-time gigs, tutoring sessions, or help with errands. A kind of Craigslist meets LinkedIn, but tailor-made for college life. It was my baby. I'd written every line of code, sketched every layout, spent countless nights fixing bugs while Jake handled the branding and outreach part. That was our agreement. I built, he pitched. I was fine with it because I genuinely trusted him. We'd sit on our ragged couch eating cold pepperoni pizza and brainstorming features while YouTube tutorials played in the background. Jake would dream big, talking about expanding it nationwide, getting investors, even creating a scholarship fund later down the line. It all sounded good. It felt like we were building something real together. The first cracks appeared subtly. Jake started getting weirdly possessive about our app's social media handles, saying he'd handle it since he was better at communication. Then he began missing our coding sessions, showing up late or shrugging off updates with a casual, just email me the progress. I brushed it off, thinking he was tired or overwhelmed with classes. But one night, while I was testing an early build, he walked in half drunk from some networking event and slumped on the couch next to me. Bro, he said, slurring slightly, you're like the Elon Musk of this thing. You do all the rocket science, I just talk about it. I laughed, not realizing that was foreshadowing the biggest stab in the back I'd ever get. A few weeks later, we submitted our project proposal to the university's startup incubator. It was supposed to be a joint submission, but Jake insisted he'd handle the forms. I didn't think twice about it. Why would I? He was my friend, my roommate, my partner. Days went by and I didn't hear back, but Jake acted unusually calm. Then one afternoon, I was scrolling through our university's tech forum when I saw a post that made my stomach drop. It was from the incubator's official page announcing shortlisted candidates. Right there, in bold letters, was "Quick Link" by Jake Matthews. For a second, I thought maybe it was just a typo or a misunderstanding, but when I clicked the link, my entire world stopped. The project description, the interface screenshots, the tagline, everything was mine, down to the color palette I designed. The only difference was the name, Quick Link, instead of Link Up. I confronted Jake that night. He was in the kitchen, heating leftovers, acting like nothing had happened. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely get words out. What the hell is Quick Link? I asked, holding my phone in his face. His expression didn't even flicker with guilt. He just smirked, leaned against the counter, and said, "Relax, man. It's the same project, but I had to present it solo for now. They only allow individual entries." I couldn't believe how casually he said it. "Solo? You mean you presented our project as yours?" He sighed like I was overreacting. "Dude, chill. Once I get it through the incubator, we'll bring you in. You're the tech guy, remember? I'm just a face." That sentence hit harder than any insult could. The tech guy, the background player, the invisible engine. I didn't say another word. I went into my room, closed the door, and sat staring at my code files for hours, realizing the nightmare I was living in. The next few days were pure hell. Jake's name started circulating around campus. He was suddenly the hotshot founder of this amazing app concept. Professors praised him. Girls who barely looked at us before started flirting with him. He was invited to pitch nights and mentorship programs. I watched it all unfold like a bad movie I couldn't turn off. Every time someone mentioned QuickLink, I felt like screaming. But I didn't. I swallowed it, told myself reacting rashly would make me look bitter or crazy. Instead, I started observing. I noticed Jake's newfound arrogance, how he'd cut conversations short when I entered the room, how he stopped saying we and started saying I. He'd come home late, half drunk from networking events, boasting about meeting investors. Steve, bro, we're gonna be rich, he'd say, even though he'd stopped sharing any real updates with me. The night I overheard him on the phone with an investor saying, yeah, I coded the whole back end myself, I knew the person I'd called my best friend was gone. What hurt most wasn't even the money or fame, it was the betrayal. The quiet, personal betrayal of someone who'd seen me at my most exhausted, most passionate, and decided that was his opportunity to climb higher. It wasn't a one-time mistake, it was a decision, a choice to erase me. That's when something inside me shifted. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I just went cold. I started thinking not like a hurt friend, but like an engineer solving a problem. If Jake wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. Revenge didn't mean blowing up his project, it meant letting him walk straight into a trap he wouldn't see coming. I began documenting everything. Every code commit on GitHub, every timestamp, every chat message discussing the app's features. I found emails where I'd sent him prototypes weeks before he claimed ownership. I even had drafts of our first pitch deck with both our names on it. Evidence was my weapon, and I was collecting it meticulously. Jake, oblivious, kept digging his own grave. He started skipping rent, claiming he was tight on cash, while posting pictures of him drinking champagne at startup mixers. He told people he was working on updates when, in reality, I'd written 90% of the app, and he barely understood half the logic. I watched him bask in fake glory, knowing it was only temporary. One night, I came home early from the library and caught him on my laptop. My password wasn't hard to guess, but what pissed me off was that he was snooping through my project folders. When I asked what he was doing, he jumped and said, just borrowing a few snippets for a class project. That was when I realized he wasn't just greedy, he was desperate. I let him take whatever he wanted. Every stolen line of code was just another piece of evidence that would one day burn him. I started building security traps inside the code. Digital fingerprints, small unique markers that could trace back to me no matter where the code ended up. If he used my work again, I'd have undeniable proof. But here's the thing about revenge. It's not just about payback, it's about patience. I didn't want to explode his life overnight. I wanted him to build his tower of lies high enough for the fall to shatter everything. I smiled when he bragged about his new investor and pretended to be supportive. Inside, I was cataloging every step he took. And as he drifted further from being my friend and deeper into his ego, I found a strange kind of peace in knowing the truth was on my side. People saw him as successful, but I saw the cracks forming. The app crashed constantly. Users complained about payment issues. I even noticed him trying to outsource fixes to random freelancers online because he couldn't handle the code himself. There was this one night. We were sitting in the living room, him on a phone call bragging to some investor about his vision for QuickLink. When he hung up, I asked him, do you even remember how the app's main algorithm works? He looked annoyed, like I was testing him. Of course, man, he said, bluffing. I wrote it. I smiled faintly. Cool, because when that algorithm breaks, I'd love to see how you fix it. He didn't realize it, but I'd already started working on a better, more secure version of LinkUp under a different name. Something cleaner, faster, smarter, something that would bury QuickLink when the time came. The next morning, he left early for a meeting. I sat down at my desk, opened my old project files, and stared at the familiar code that had once meant friendship and collaboration. Now, it represented betrayal, but also rebirth. I renamed the root folder NextLink, hit save, and took a deep breath. The game had officially begun. Jake thought he'd stolen my dream. What he didn't know was that I'd just started building his downfall, one line of code at a time. By the time Jake's QuickLink became the talk of campus, I'd learned how to smile through my own humiliation. Everywhere I went, his name was plastered across flyers, interviews, and college newsletters. Jake Matthews, the genius behind QuickLink, the app revolutionizing campus work. There was even a short article in the Austin Student Tech Review with a picture of him standing in front of our Sheridan apartment, looking like a Silicon Valley prodigy with his fake confident smirk. I'd wake up every morning to his voice on calls, talking about user acquisition and scaling operations, phrases he barely understood. At first, it was surreal to see my own work being celebrated by someone else, but after the shock wore off, it became fuel. I didn't argue, didn't post angry tweets, didn't confront anyone. Instead, I stayed silent because I knew silence makes people careless. Jake thought I was done, that I'd accepted my role as the forgotten roommate. But what he didn't know was that while he was busy building his image, I was building his end. I remember one night, about a month after his pitch went viral on LinkedIn, he came home with two girls, both laughing as he bragged about his coding journey and how he built QuickLink from scratch. I was sitting at my desk debugging a part of my new app, and when they passed by, I heard one of them say, "You're seriously so smart, Jake. Like, you're gonna be rich." He laughed, that obnoxious fake laugh, and said, "Yeah, it's crazy what hard work gets you." I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. Hard work? The guy hadn't written a single working function in his life. He didn't even understand basic backend structure, but I stayed quiet. I'd learned something valuable from watching him. The loudest people often hide the emptiest code. When Jake landed a $50,000 seed fund from a local angel investor, the house turned into a circus. He started throwing weekend parties like he was already a millionaire. There were beer cans everywhere, loud music till 3 a.m., and his new business friends who wore fake Gucci belts and called themselves entrepreneurs. They'd sit on our couch, talk about scaling user databases and burn rates, while I sat in the corner, quietly writing the actual code that made his stolen idea even possible. He'd barely talk to me now unless he needed something. He owed rent, ignored bills, and when I reminded him, he'd wave his hand dismissively. "Bro, relax. I've got investors now. You'll get your money soon enough." He started buying expensive clothes, new shoes, even got himself a MacBook Pro he didn't know how to use properly. I couldn't believe how fast success had turned him into a caricature. But arrogance has a pattern. It blinds you to your mistakes. I started noticing cracks in his empire. His app began crashing under heavy load, students were complaining about slow responses, and a few even mentioned payment issues on Reddit threads. One user posted, "QuickLink took my payment and didn't send the confirmation. Can someone fix this?" Jake didn't even know about it because he barely checked user feedback. He was too busy showing off his new watch to care. I'd quietly peek into his code repository from time to time. Yes, he was still using the same GitHub where I had access, and what I saw made me laugh. It was chaos. Half-broken functions, random lines copied from Stack Overflow, and plagiarized code from open source projects without attribution. It was like watching someone trying to fly a plane with duct tape. Meanwhile, I was spending every ounce of focus on building Nextlink, my upgraded version of our original concept. It wasn't just about revenge. I wanted to create something better, smarter, cleaner, ethical. I designed it from scratch, changed the architecture, improved the security, and made sure every bit of it was legally mine. I used a pseudonym to register the app under a different entity so Jake wouldn't connect the dots. I even consulted a small business lawyer downtown and filed the ownership paperwork properly this time. Lesson learned: trust is temporary, documentation is forever. My fake name was Eli Torres, a completely fabricated persona with a neutral online presence. Eli didn't have baggage or a roommate who stabbed him in the back. Eli was just a young developer with a vision. While I coded, I kept collecting evidence like a forensic investigator. I had GitHub timestamps from months before his QuickLink presentation, chat logs where he literally said, "You handle the coding, I'll handle the talking," and emails showing me sending him the prototypes. Every single thing was stored safely in an encrypted drive. And when I say safely, I mean I had triple backups, local, cloud, and one physical copy on a USB hidden in a drawer Jake would never think to look in. Revenge wasn't about rage anymore. It was methodical, calm, precise, the kind that doesn't scream. It whispers until it hits like a thunderclap. Jake's ego inflated with every compliment he got. He started hanging out with our professors, trying to secure mentorship deals. He'd show up late to class, wearing sunglasses indoors, acting like he was too busy managing his company to do homework. One time, he actually had the audacity to say, "Steve, you should be more social, man. That's why I'm ahead. Coding's cool, but no one notices you if you're invisible." I smiled because if he had any idea how visible his mistakes were to me, he'd have shut his mouth. The irony of it all was hilarious. He was mocking the very guy who made his fake fame possible. I just nodded and said, "You're right, Jake. I should get out more." And I did. I started attending tech meetups, quietly promoting Nextlink under my fake alias. No flashy marketing, no big claims, just solid functionality. Within a few weeks, I had a small but loyal user base that actually loved the app. As Nextlink started to gain traction, I kept tabs on QuickLink's slow decline. Complaints piled up, bugs increased, and Jake's temper grew worse. He'd come home frustrated, snapping at everyone, slamming his laptop shut, muttering about lazy interns or bad luck. He'd started outsourcing parts of his code to cheap freelancers overseas, hoping they'd fix things he couldn't understand. I almost felt bad watching him spiral, but then I'd remember the night he told those girls he built it all himself, and the sympathy would vanish instantly. Karma wasn't just coming, it was evolving line by line inside my laptop. One afternoon, I overheard Jake on the phone with the investor who funded him. He was pacing the living room, his voice strained. "No, sir, it's just a minor bug. Yes, our team is on it. Yeah, the payments issue is fixed." He hung up and threw his phone on the couch, running a hand through his hair. When he saw me, he forced a smile. "Rough day?" I asked, pretending to sound concerned. Nah, just scaling problems. You wouldn't get it, he said with a smirk. Oh, I got it all right. I understood that his so-called empire was built on sand. He didn't know how to fix his own product, and he didn't realize the guy living 10 feet away was already coding the tsunami that would wash him away. As months passed, our apartment dynamic turned icy. Jake barely acknowledged me anymore unless he needed a favor, like borrowing my HDMI cable or asking how to fix a crash error. He was still throwing parties, still bragging, but the shine was fading. Even his business friends started drifting away when they realized QuickLink wasn't delivering results. One night, he accused one of his part-time freelancers of leaking code. I nearly laughed out loud at the irony. He had no clue that the real threat wasn't outside his circle. It was right under his nose, coding quietly, watching every misstep. By that time, Nextlink had grown beyond campus. I'd released a beta version to nearby universities, using subtle marketing that emphasized reliability and security. Everything QuickLink lacked. The response was overwhelming. Students loved it, tutors praised it, and part-time workers said it felt safer and faster. I wasn't just beating Jake, I was replacing him. And he didn't even know it yet. It was poetic, really. His stolen idea, reborn into something purer, taking him down from the shadows. I remember the first time he noticed the competition. He was scrolling through Reddit and suddenly said, "What the hell is Nextlink? They totally copied my idea." I was sitting at the dining table, pretending to do homework. I shrugged. "Happens all the time in tech, man. Welcome to the game." He nodded, annoyed, and started ranting about idea thieves. It was like watching a magician fall for his own trick. The hypocrisy was so thick I almost choked on my laughter. I kept feeding him subtle misinformation too. Whenever he asked my opinion about fixing bugs, I'd give him vague, misleading advice. Never enough to crash his app instantly, but enough to make him waste hours chasing the wrong solutions. Meanwhile, I refined Nextlink to perfection, optimizing every user flow, ensuring the database was airtight, and implementing a customer support feature that QuickLink completely lacked. Every new feature I added was a silent knife twisting deeper into his illusion of control. The more Nextlink grew, the more paranoid Jake became. He'd stay up all night, muttering about spies and copycats. He even accused one of his interns of leaking data. The irony was unbearable. I wanted to tell him, "Jake, the spy's right here, eating cereal across from you every morning," but I held back. I wanted him to crumble on his own timeline. Watching him spiral was more satisfying than any confrontation could ever be. One morning, I woke up to find him sitting on the couch, his eyes bloodshot, surrounded by empty Red Bull cans. "They're stealing my users," he said without looking at me. "This Nextlink thing is ruining me." I just stood there, sipping my coffee, and said, "Maybe they just built something better." He glared at me, but I didn't flinch. In that moment, I think part of him suspected me. But Jake was too arrogant to believe his invisible roommate could outsmart him. That arrogance would be his undoing. As QuickLink's numbers kept dropping, I finalized Nextlink's legal protections. My lawyer helped me file the copyright paperwork, making my ownership airtight. Jake couldn't touch me now, even if he found out. The revenge plan had officially moved from emotional to strategic. The storm I'd been quietly coding for months was now a hurricane on the horizon. Jake thought he was untouchable, but the truth was, every line of code he'd stolen was a ticking time bomb, and I was the one holding the detonator. I still remember the night I hit launch on Nextlink. No champagne, no big celebration, no friends cheering in the background. Just me, my laptop, and the soft hum of my old desktop fan as I watched the analytics page refresh every few seconds. It was 2:43 a.m., and I had been awake for 30 hours straight. My eyes were bloodshot, my fingers trembling slightly from caffeine overload. But when I saw the first 10 signups roll in within minutes of release, I knew something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just building another app anymore. I was building payback, cold, calculated, and perfectly disguised. Nextlink wasn't just a platform. It was the beginning of a silent storm that would rip through everything Jake had built on top of my work and lies. I launched it under a different name, Team Hypernova, a made-up group identity that sounded techie and cool. No one would suspect it was just me behind it. I'd learned the hard way that credit is a fragile currency. People only value the face behind the success, not the hands that built it. This time, there would be no face, just results. In the early days, I made every move count. While Jake was out doing interviews, flexing his entrepreneur persona, I was building loyalty, one user at a time. Nextlink wasn't just a better product, it felt personal. I added features that solved real student pain points. Instant payment systems for gigs, verified tutor profiles, feedback scores, and even a sleek, minimal dashboard that looked like something out of Silicon Valley. I knew exactly what QuickLink lacked because I'd built the original bones of it myself. Every flaw, every bug, every clunky interface, those were my unintentional fingerprints. I knew how to erase them and outdo myself. Within 3 weeks, word started spreading across campus. Students loved the smoother experience. It didn't lag, it didn't crash, payments went through instantly, and customer support actually responded within minutes because, well, that was me on the other end, pretending to be a full team through different email aliases. Nextlink's so much better than QuickLink, I overheard one girl say in the cafeteria. Quicklink took my RS 800 and didn't even confirm my tutor session. I sat 3 tables away, pretending to scroll through my phone, hiding a small smirk behind my coffee mug. That was the first time I felt it, the satisfaction of striking back, not through anger, but through quiet excellence. Jake, of course, was too self-absorbed to notice the shift at first. He was too busy being a tech celebrity on campus. The guy had gone from sharing instant noodles with me at 3 a.m. to wearing designer hoodies and giving founder talks about innovation and vision. He even started skipping classes, claiming he was too busy managing his company. The irony? The company was slowly falling apart behind their scenes, bugs piled up, users complained, and his quick patch backend started breaking under server load. I could see all of it, literally, because I had access. Remember that time he borrowed my laptop to check some analytics? Yeah. That day, I planted my little gift, a tracker buried deep in the backend code of his cloud folder. It wasn't malicious. I wasn't hacking his life or anything illegal. I just gave myself a window, a small digital peephole into the kingdom he stole from me. I watched him upload broken code, copy stack overflow snippets, and even borrow old parts of my original source. Every time he saved a file, I got a timestamp. Every time he ran a test, I got a ping. I didn't even need to touch his system again. Jake was too careless to realize how exposed he'd left himself. And then, Quicklink started bleeding. Users complained about data losses and payment delays. A rumor spread that one student's information got leaked. Jake tried to manage it with his usual charm, brushing it off as minor glitches, but students don't forgive easily when it's their money or grades at stake. Nextlink, on the other hand, was quietly gaining traction. I'd partnered with a few trusted student influencers, under fake names of course, to promote the platform subtly. Not sponsored, but I switched to Nextlink and it's been a game changer. They'd post Instagram stories, Reddit threads, and campus group shoutouts. Within 2 months, Nextlink had taken over 70% of the user base Quicklink once dominated. Jake noticed. Oh, he definitely noticed. I'll never forget the first time he confronted me about it. It was late evening, the apartment dimly lit by the soft orange glow of the city lights. He walked in, visibly irritated, tossing his phone on the table. "Have you heard of this Nextlink thing?" he asked, pacing around. "Some knockoff that's stealing all my users." I kept my tone neutral, feigning mild curiosity. "Yeah, I saw something about it on Reddit. Seems like they're doing well." He scoffed, slumping onto the couch. "Doing well? They're literally copying my idea. It's the same concept. Probably some wannabe trying to ride my success." I had to bite my tongue to stop myself from laughing. The audacity of him calling me a copycat without realizing who he was talking to was poetic. I leaned back casually. "Maybe they're just better at execution," I said. He shot me a glare, clearly annoyed. "Execution? Dude, I built Quicklink from scratch." That was the moment I realized something crucial. Jake believed his own lies now. He wasn't pretending anymore. He genuinely thought Quicklink was his creation. It wasn't even guilt that fueled him now, it was delusion. And I could use that. The more Nextlink grew, the more desperate Jake became. He started pushing half-baked updates, hiring cheap freelance developers, even trying to integrate shady ad networks to make up for his financial losses. Investors started asking questions. The $50,000 seed fund was drying up fast. Meanwhile, I was running Nextlink, lean and efficient, with actual revenue flowing from paid tutor matches and verified job postings. Every day, I saw more proof that the best revenge wasn't confrontation. It was competence. Then one afternoon, I got an email that nearly made me spit out my drink. It was from Jake's college email, sent to our campus mailing list. Urgent. Nextlink has stolen proprietary Quicklink data and features. Legal action pending. Attached was a long rant accusing the unknown creators behind Nextlink of theft, fraud, and unethical competition. The irony nearly killed me. Jake, the guy who stole my code, was now accusing me of stealing his stolen idea. The comments flooded in fast. Students debating, some defending Nextlink, others supporting Jake. But one thing was clear. Everyone was watching now. That's when I got the email that changed everything. TechFest 2025. Innovation Challenge. Applications open. It was our university's biggest annual competition, where startups and student projects went head-to-head before a panel of industry judges and investors. The prize? A $100,000 funding grant and mentorship from a top accelerator. I stared at the screen for a long moment before a slow grin spread across my face. This was it, the perfect stage, a public arena where I could show the world the difference between a thief and a creator. But I couldn't just walk in as myself. Steve, the quiet coder, had no clout. Jake's fame would easily overshadow anything I did, unless I hit him where it hurt most, his credibility. So I registered Nextlink under Team Hypernova, listing a few fake names for legal formality. The project summary was crisp, professional, and heavy on the technical innovation. I poured my soul into the demo version, making sure every line of code ran smoother than silk. I built new AI-based recommendation algorithms, automated dispute resolution, and real-time gig verification. All original, all brilliant. The backend was bulletproof, and the front-end UI looked so polished it could pass for a funded startup's product. Meanwhile, Jake was spiraling. He began reaching out to people for help, trying to recruit anyone with basic coding skills. I even caught him complaining in a group chat we used to share. Some loser behind Nextlink is ruining my career. If I find out who it is, I'll bury them. Oh, Jake, I thought, you already did that once. You buried me. Now it's my turn to dig you up. The week before TechFest, I ran into him on campus. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, hoodie wrinkled, voice tense. You going to TechFest? He asked casually. Maybe, I replied, pretending not to care. You? He smirked faintly. Of course. Quicklink's the future. I just hope they don't let those Nextlink frauds participate. I nodded, keeping my expression blank, though inside I was practically laughing. Then came the final move. I gathered every piece of evidence I've been saving for months. GitHub commits, timestamped design drafts, code comparisons, chat screenshots of Jake pitching the app as his own, and the original link-up pitch deck with both our names still on it. I compiled it all into a clean, professional file titled Ownership and Development Records, Nextlink Project Origin. Confidential. It was meticulous, factual, and absolutely devastating if revealed publicly. The night before TechFest, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous, but because I could feel it. The calm before the storm. I walked into the auditorium the next morning wearing a plain black hoodie and jeans, blending into the crowd. Team Hypernova, you're next, one of the coordinators said. I walked onto the stage, laptop in hand, facing a panel of judges and hundreds of students, Jake among them, sitting front row, completely unaware. My voice didn't shake when I began. Good morning, my name is Steve and I'm here to present Nextlink, a new generation platform built by students for students. I wish I could describe the look on Jake's face in that moment. His jaw literally dropped. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to pure panic. For a second, our eyes met, and for the first time, I wasn't the quiet roommate or the background coder. I was the storm he never saw coming. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was justice, wrapped in code and silence, waiting to strike under the bright lights of the biggest stage of our lives. The morning of TechFest felt like the world was holding its breath. The university auditorium was buzzing with energy, packed with students, journalists, investors, and tech enthusiasts. Massive LED screens displayed the event lineup, and banners of innovation and entrepreneurship hung from the ceiling. I sat quietly in the back, hoodie up, laptop bag beside me, watching Jake charm the crowd like he always did. He was already up front, laughing with one of the judges, wearing a crisp blazer that looked too expensive for a college student, and holding a sleek tablet with the Quicklink logo flashing across it. To everyone else, he was the golden boy, the campus tech prodigy, the kid who made it big before graduation. To me, he was just a thief standing on a ticking time bomb, completely unaware that his expiration date was today. The theme of TechFest was innovation with integrity, and I couldn't help but smile at the irony of it. Jake was about to learn what that second word really meant. When my turn finally came, the coordinator's voice echoed through the mic. Next up, Team Hypernova presenting Nextlink. I stood, laptop in hand, heartbeat steady but sharp like the click of a metronome. Every step toward the stage felt like I was walking out of the shadows I'd lived in for too long. The lights were bright, hot even, and as I turned toward the audience, I could see the rows of faces, classmates, professors, judges, and right there in the front row, Jake himself, leaning back in his seat, smirking. He didn't know yet. He thought Nextlink was just another competitor he'd crush with his PR charm. But then he saw me plug in my laptop, my name pop up on the presenter screen, and I watched his smirk falter. His face twisted in confusion, then disbelief. And when I said, "Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Carter, and I'm here to present Nextlink, a student-led innovation built to empower campus connections," I could almost hear his heart drop to the floor. The presentation started smooth. I walked them through Nextlink's journey, its purpose, features, growth metrics, and real success stories. The judge nodded, impressed. Investors murmured to each other. I showcased the UI flow, the clean interface, the analytics dashboard. I spoke confidently, letting every word slice through the air like a finely sharpened blade. In just 3 months, Nextlink has grown from 10 users to over 5,000 active accounts, I said, flipping through slides of growth graphs and user testimonials. Unlike other platforms, we prioritize trust, speed, and transparency. Jake shifted in his seat at the word transparency. I let it hang there a moment longer before continuing. And today, I want to show you not just innovation, but integrity. That's when the real show began. I switched slides and the screen filled with 2 columns of code side by side, one labeled Quicklink, the other Link Up Original. A quiet ripple of confusion moved through the audience. Before I built Nextlink, I began calmly, I created a prototype called Link Up with someone I once considered my best friend, but that friend took my code, renamed it Quicklink, and claimed full ownership. Jake's eyes went wide. He started shaking his head, mouthing something I couldn't hear. The audience leaned forward. Now, I'm not here to accuse anyone without proof, I continued, so I'll let the evidence speak for itself. I clicked the next slide. The big screen displayed version logs with my name, timestamps from months before QuickLink's first commit, GitHub repositories with creation dates, and screenshots of our original chat conversations where Jake praised my progress and promised we'd share credit equally. Gasp echoed through the auditorium. One of the judges leaned toward the others, whispering rapidly. I didn't stop there. Here, I said, zooming into a specific line of code. You can see my original function naming pattern identical in QuickLink's backend. Even the typos are the same. The crowd murmured louder, heads turning toward Jake. I flipped to another slide, a screenshot of Jake's email to a college incubator, where he'd submitted the QuickLink idea as his own with my original file name still attached in the metadata. I trusted him, I said quietly, the words heavy with memory. He told me he wanted to help pitch the idea. Instead, he replaced me. The silence that followed was thunderous. Jake shot up from his seat, voice trembling as he yelled, "This is ridiculous. You're twisting the story. It was a team project." His voice cracked slightly, and that little tremor gave him away. The judges turned toward him, unimpressed. I kept my tone calm, controlled, and cutting. A team project doesn't mean stealing credit, I replied evenly. If it were a team project, your name would still appear in my original repository commits, but it doesn't, because you never wrote a single line of code. A few students in the crowd gasped again. Some of Jake's old supporters were whispering among themselves, clearly uncomfortable. One of the investors, the same one who'd given Jake $50,000, leaned over and whispered something to his assistant, who immediately began typing on a tablet. Jake's face was pale now, sweat glistening on his forehead under the lights. "You're lying," he shouted again, his voice cracking louder this time, but his confidence was gone. The judges requested to verify the code logs on the spot. I had everything ready, local files, GitHub timestamps, even screen recordings of early development. They examined them, nodding slowly. One of them, a seasoned entrepreneur, finally said into the mic, "Mr. Carter, your documentation is thorough and authentic. Thank you for your transparency." Then he turned to Jake. "Mr. Thompson, do you have any verifiable proof that you contributed to these files?" Jake stammered. I had ideas. I helped design the interface." "On what design files?" Another judge interrupted. Jake froze. He had nothing. The investor stood up abruptly, microphone in hand. "Effective immediately. QuickLink's funding is suspended," he announced. "We don't invest in dishonesty. We invest in integrity." The crowd erupted gasps, murmurs, whispers like wildfire spreading through dry grass. Jake sank back into his seat, face buried in his hands. The once golden boy of campus now looked like a shadow of himself. Professors who used to praise him avoided eye contact. The event coordinators spoke quietly with the university officials, and soon after, an announcement followed. Due to credible evidence of academic fraud, QuickLink is officially disqualified from TechFest. It was over. But for me, it wasn't about the trophy or applause. I didn't even celebrate when NextLink was declared the winner by unanimous decision. I just stood there as the crowd clapped, feeling a strange mix of peace and emptiness. Revenge, I realized, didn't feel like fire. It felt like silence, calm, steady, and absolute. Jake tried to approach me after the event. He looked broken, eyes red, voice small. "Steve, man, please," he muttered. "I messed up, okay? I didn't mean to." I cut him off, my tone gentle but final. "You meant every part of it, Jake. You wanted the fame. You just didn't want the responsibility." He shook his head, tears forming. "We could have fixed this together." I looked at him one last time and said, "We could have if you hadn't sold me out." Then I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in the noise of his own collapse. The aftermath hit fast. Within days, the university opened a formal academic misconduct investigation. Emails circulated about plagiarism and code theft. Jake's investors cut ties. Professors revoked his project credits, and soon the news hit local media. Campus startup founder exposed for stealing teammates' code. His reputation crumbled overnight. He dropped out shortly after, though I heard through friends that he tried to appeal. It didn't matter. His credibility was gone. And in the tech world, that's a death sentence. Meanwhile, NextLink exploded. Tech blogs picked up the story of the real creator. I got calls from angel investors, offers from accelerators, and even messages from other universities wanting to partner. Within months, I registered NextLink as an official company. Real investors came on board, the kind who saw potential in not just the product, but in me. The irony? The same $50,000 that had once been Jake's seed fund, I now raised in a single weekend. NextLink grew into a legitimate startup, employing fellow students, expanding beyond campus, and turning profit faster than I'd imagined. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of Jake around town, disheveled, distant, a ghost of who he used to be. He avoided eye contact, and I never sought it either. There was no satisfaction left to find there. The story had already written itself. I didn't destroy him. I just let him trip over his own lies. Karma had done the rest. Looking back now, it's almost poetic how things unfolded. I learned that betrayal doesn't always need to be answered with rage. Sometimes you let the truth do the talking. Sometimes you just move smarter, build stronger, and let time reveal who was right all along. QuickLink died a loud, messy death. Next Link rose in silence, built not just from code, but from resilience, patience, and the calm fire of justice. And if there's one lesson I carry with me every day, it's this. Sometimes you don't need to destroy someone. You just let them trip over their own lies. The end. My college trip went horribly wrong, and I almost didn't make it back. Hey, Reddit, I've never really written anything like this before, but after what happened 2 years ago on my college trip, I don't think I'll ever be able to move on until I get it out somewhere. My name's Mia Carter. I was 23 when this all happened, and I was a psychology major at the University of Oregon, just trying to enjoy one last group trip before graduation. It was supposed to be this laid-back weekend at Crater Lake. Camping, hiking, photos, s'mores. You know, the typical college adventure vibe before real life hits. I went with a small group. Chloe, my roommate and best friend since freshman year. Ryan, who I had a massive crush on for literally years. Nate, our class clown who couldn't take anything seriously. And Professor Ellis, who was our faculty chaperone and honestly, one of the nicest teachers I'd ever had. He was the one who made the trip happen for the psychology seniors, saying it would be good for bonding and reflection before your next chapter in life. It was supposed to be fun. It was supposed to be perfect, but it's the weekend that still gives me nightmares every time I close my eyes. We left campus early Friday morning, our bags stuffed with snacks, cheap camping gear, and all the overconfidence that comes with being in your 20s. I remember Chloe blasting music and singing like she was performing at Coachella while Ryan drove, pretending he wasn't enjoying it but tapping the steering wheel in rhythm. Nate was in the back seat making dumb jokes about how we'd probably get eaten by a bear or abducted by hillbillies, and we'd all just laugh because it sounded ridiculous. I sat by the window, feeling the wind in my hair, trying to ignore the way my heart raced whenever Ryan looked back at me in the rear view mirror. For a while, it was perfect. Blue skies, green trees, the smell of pine, and the kind of laughter that feels endless when you're young and happy. Then, about 4 hours into the drive, the GPS said we were close, but Ryan, being Ryan, said he knew a shortcut that would get us there faster. Professor Ellis wasn't in the van with us. He had taken his own car with 2 other students who were meeting us there later that night. So when Ryan insisted on the shortcut, there wasn't exactly anyone to stop him. I still remember the moment the paved road turned to gravel. Chloe said, Rye, are you sure this is still a road? And he just grinned like he was in a movie. Trust me, Google says it's a route. Except Google stopped talking about 15 minutes later when the signal dropped and the trees started swallowing the sunlight. The road got narrower, bumpier, and honestly kind of eerie. The canopy above us was so thick that even at 3 in the afternoon, it looked like dusk. We hit a pothole so hard that Chloe screamed, and Nate laughed, "Oh great, this is how horror movies start." I remember saying something like, "Stop jinxing us," but my voice didn't sound playful anymore. The forest felt too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of tires on gravel. Ryan started getting frustrated, muttering that the GPS would reconnect soon, but it didn't. When the road eventually split into 2 dirt paths, neither of which looked promising, we stopped. "Left or right?" he asked, half joking, and for a moment nobody said anything. Then Nate flipped a coin. Heads left, tails right. It landed on heads. So we went left. Bad choice. About half a mile later, the van jerked violently. There was a snap and the front wheel sank into mud. Ryan cursed, trying to reverse, but the tire just spun, spitting muck everywhere. We were stuck. Chloe groaned, "You've got to be kidding me." And Nate said, "Guess we're camping early?" Like it was funny, but nobody laughed. We tried to push the van out, all of us slipping in the mud, sweating under the thick air. Ryan's hands were shaking from frustration. After a while, we just gave up. "We'll wait till morning," he said, wiping his forehead. "Maybe someone will pass by." But deep down, we all knew no one was coming. That road was dead. The light was fading, and we hadn't seen another car in hours. There was no signal, no sign of civilization, just endless trees. So we did what college kids do when they're lost. We tried to make it an adventure. We set up a little camp area near a clearing by the van. Nate started a fire while Chloe unpacked the food. Ryan was trying to act calm, but I could see the worry in his eyes every time he glanced at the van. The forest looked ancient, almost too quiet, like it was holding its breath. After the sun went down, the temperature dropped fast. We sat around the fire eating chips and jerky, trying to convince ourselves it wasn't a big deal. Nate told ghost stories, Ryan threw twigs at him, and for a moment, I felt okay. I remember leaning back, staring at the stars and thinking, this will be funny to tell later. But then I heard it. The first noise. A crack, a sharp, deliberate snap like a branch breaking underfoot. I froze. "Did you guys hear that?" I whispered. Chloe laughed nervously. "Probably a raccoon." Ryan threw another stick into the fire. "Relax, Mia, you're in nature." But it wasn't just one sound. A few seconds later, there was another, then another, from different directions. I could feel the hairs on my arms stand up. Nate grabbed a flashlight and shined it toward the trees, calling out, "Who's there?" in his mock horror voice. But it didn't feel funny anymore. The beam hit nothing but dense woods. Still, we all moved a little closer to the fire. No one admitted it, but we were scared. After a while, things went quiet again. We stayed up talking until almost midnight, mostly to drown out the silence, and then everyone slowly drifted off to their tents. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling us. At one point, I swore I saw a movement just beyond the edge of the firelight, like a figure shifting between the trees. My heartbeat was so loud I could hear it in my ears. I tried to tell myself it was just the shadows or my mind playing tricks on me. I'm a psychology student, right? I know how the brain exaggerates fear. So I forced myself to breathe, got up quietly, and stepped outside to calm down. The night air was icy and sharp. The fire was dying down, glowing orange. The forest was pitch black except for the flickering light, and everything smelled like damp wood and smoke. I walked a few feet away, just far enough to stretch my legs, when something on a tree caught my eye. It was carved into the bark, a strange symbol, circular, almost like a spiral with jagged lines through it. It didn't look random. It looked deliberate, old, and deep. My stomach turned. I moved closer, running my hand over it, and that's when I noticed something else hanging from a branch above. A small piece of fabric, red and stiff with what looked like dried blood. I froze. It didn't belong to any of us. I stepped back so fast I tripped over a root and hit the ground hard. My breathing went wild. I scrambled back toward the fire and shook Ryan awake. He mumbled, "What? What's wrong?" And I told him to come look. He followed me, groggy and annoyed, but when I pointed at the symbol and the fabric, his face changed. "That's weird," he said, voice low. "Probably a hunter's mark or something, but hunters don't leave bloody fabric hanging from trees." "Let's just go back," he said quickly, pulling me away. We didn't tell the others right away. We sat by the fire till sunrise, neither of us sleeping, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. At dawn, Chloe came out of her tent rubbing her eyes, asking why we were awake, and we both just shrugged. Nate was still snoring. The forest looked different in daylight, still, heavy, and endless. I tried to laugh it off, but when I looked back at the tree, I swear I could still see that carved symbol glaring back at me, like it was warning us. That was the moment I realized something was off, but I didn't understand how wrong everything would go after that. Looking back now, I wish we'd left then. I wish we'd just walked the road back, no matter how long it took. Because that symbol, it wasn't the only one. And that wasn't the only thing waiting for us in those woods. When I woke up that morning, I could tell something was wrong before I even opened my eyes. The air felt heavier, the silence thicker. I sat up and looked around our small makeshift camp, and that's when I noticed Ryan crouched by the van, cursing under his breath while Chloe stood next to him, arms crossed, her face pale. "It won't start," he muttered when he saw me watching. I rubbed my eyes, still half asleep. "What do you mean it won't start?" "I mean," he said sharply, "the battery's dead, the ignition's unresponsive, and we're officially screwed." Nate came stumbling out of his tent with bedhead and his usual stupid grin, saying something about how maybe the forest spirits drained the power, but no one laughed. Professor Ellis had promised to meet us there that morning with the other group, but by noon, he still hadn't shown up. There was no signal, no sound of any approaching car, not even birds. It was like the forest had swallowed the world whole. Ryan kicked at the tire, muttering to himself, and Chloe started pacing, saying we needed to walk back the way we came, but Ryan insisted that Ellis would find us eventually. I didn't say much. I was too busy staring at the tree with the carved symbol, which looked even deeper now, like the bark had bled overnight. Around midday, Professor Ellis said he was going to hike down the dirt road to see if he could find a better signal or someone to help. "Stay here. Don't wander," he told us before grabbing his backpack and heading out. I remember watching him disappear between the trees, his figure shrinking until he was just a blur. That was the last time I ever saw him. The hours dragged by. We tried to keep ourselves busy. Chloe and I made a small pile of firewood. Nate tried to fix the van battery with jumper cables that clearly weren't going to work. And Ryan climbed up a nearby hill hoping to get service, but came back shaking his head. By 3 p.m., we were all starting to lose patience. "He should have been back by now," Chloe said, her voice shaky. "Maybe he found someone," Nate said. "Maybe he's just taking longer, or maybe he's lost," I said quietly. Ryan gave me a look that said, "Don't start that." But the truth was already gnawing at all of us. The sun started to dip earlier than usual, turning the forest gold and shadowy, and with every minute that passed, the anxiety crept higher. Finally, Ryan said, "I'm not just sitting here anymore. Mia, come with me. We'll look around just a little." Chloe immediately protested. "That's a bad idea. You'll just get lost too." But I could see the panic in Ryan's eyes, and honestly, I couldn't stand sitting there waiting either. So, against better judgment, I grabbed my backpack, a flashlight, and followed him into the woods. We stayed close to the road for the first 10 minutes, calling out Ellis's name, but our voices sounded small against the trees. Every few minutes we'd stop and listen, but all we heard was the crunch of our boots and the occasional rustle of leaves that didn't sound like the wind. After maybe half an hour, we found something that made both of us stop cold. Footprints. They were human, fresh, and heading away from the road, deeper into the woods. "Could be him," Ryan whispered. I nodded, even though the prints were heavier, longer than I remembered Ellis's being. Still, it was something. We followed them. The deeper we went, the darker it got. The trees seemed taller, denser, the ground spongy and uneven. The air smelled strange, like metal and wet moss. At one point, I thought I heard whispers behind us, but when I turned, there was nothing there. Then, out of nowhere, Ryan stopped and pointed. Through the trees, maybe 50 feet ahead, I saw the outline of something man-made, old wooden walls, a slanted roof. Is that a cabin? He finished for me. It was small, half collapsed, and looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The door hung crookedly on one hinge. Should we... I started, but Ryan was already walking toward it. The place smelled like rot and dust. Inside, broken furniture was scattered everywhere, the floor thick with leaves and dirt. A single chair sat near a fireplace filled with ashes that looked disturbingly fresh. I remember the hairs on my neck rising when I saw that. Someone had been here, recently. Ryan picked up a faded photograph from the floor. It showed a group of people standing in the same clearing we were in, smiling, but their faces were faded out, smeared like the ink had bled. That's creepy, I muttered. Then I saw something on the table near the wall, a journal. Its cover cracked, but intact. I opened it, careful not to tear the pages. Most were filled with messy handwriting. Some of it smeared, but one entry stood out. They come at night. The woods belong to them. We shouldn't have built here. The symbols marked were not to go. I felt my stomach twist. There were other entries, mentions of gatherings, of people disappearing from nearby towns, of something called the Circle. The last line in the book just said, "If you see the mark, don't follow it." I looked at Ryan, and I could tell he was trying not to show how freaked out he was. "We should go," I whispered. "Now." He didn't argue. As we left, I glanced back and noticed another one of those spiral symbols carved into the doorframe. Only this time, it looked newer, like it had been added after the cabin decayed. We practically ran back toward camp, trying to retrace our path, but the forest felt different. I swear the trees had shifted. We made it back just as the last of the daylight faded, both of us out of breath. "Finally!" Chloe shouted when she saw us. "Where the hell were you?" But the relief on her face vanished when she noticed Nate's tent. Unzipped, empty, his things scattered like he'd left in a hurry. "He went to look for you," Chloe said, voice trembling. "He said he'd just check the road and be right back, but that was hours ago." My heart dropped. "He what?" Ryan shouted. We called his name over and over, shining flashlights in every direction, but all we got was silence. That awful, crushing silence again. Then, as I moved around the edge of the clearing, my light hit something dark on the ground. I knelt down, my hands shaking, and realized it was a trail, a line of red leading away from Nate's tent. "Ryan," I whispered, my throat tight. He turned, saw what I was looking at, and his face went white. "Is that—" He didn't finish. Chloe started crying, saying no, no, no over and over. The blood led into the woods, faint but visible, smearing across roots and rocks. Ryan wanted to follow it. Chloe begged him not to. "It's dark," she said, sobbing. "We'll get lost too." But the thought of Nate out there, hurt or worse, made it impossible to sit still. We argued for what felt like forever, until Ryan finally agreed to wait until morning. We sat by the fire again, but this time no one spoke. Every crack of the branches made us flinch. The forest didn't feel still anymore. It felt alive, like it was breathing with us. I tried to keep my eyes open, tried to stay alert, but exhaustion hit me like a wave. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I remember was waking to a sound that made my blood freeze. A scream, distant but human, high-pitched, panicked, and unmistakably Nate's. Chloe sat up, gasping. "That was him!" Ryan grabbed the flashlight and pointed it toward the woods, but the beam only cut through a few feet before vanishing into the blackness. The scream came again, weaker this time, like it was farther away. Then silence, absolute silence. I'll never forget that silence. We called his name until our voices broke, but nothing answered. And then, somewhere out there, just past where the trees met the shadows, I saw something move, a flicker of white between the trunks. It was gone in a second, but I know I saw it. I don't know if it was Nate. I don't know if it was something else, but I know that was the night everything changed. Because from that point on, I stopped believing we'd ever make it out of those woods alive. I don't think any of us really slept after that night, not even for a second. The scream still echoed in my ears when the sun rose, painting the forest in this dull, gray light that made everything look dead. Chloe's face was pale, her eyes red from crying, and Ryan just sat by the fire, staring into the ashes like he was somewhere else entirely. I kept hoping maybe we'd wake up and Nate would come stumbling out of the woods, laughing, saying it was all some messed up prank. But deep down, I knew. We all knew. He wasn't coming back. The forest felt heavier that morning, like it was aware of us, almost suffocating. Our food was running low, the van battery was dead, and now we were missing 2 people. The rational part of me tried to think logically, to plan, but everything felt wrong, like logic didn't belong here anymore. When I tried calling Professor Ellis's number again, my phone didn't even pretend to look for signal anymore. It just showed that empty, no-service bar that had started to feel like a death sentence. Chloe started breaking down around noon, shouting at Ryan, saying it was all his fault, that if he hadn't taken that stupid shortcut, none of this would have happened. Ryan didn't even defend himself at first. He just sat there, clenching his fists until finally he snapped and shouted back, "You think I wanted this? You think I planned this?" I had to step between them before it got physical. The tension was eating us alive. Eventually, we agreed to stay put one more night and start walking at dawn, but the weather had other plans. Clouds rolled in fast, thick and dark, swallowing the sky, and soon it started raining, first softly and then in heavy sheets that drenched everything we had. We rushed to cover our supplies, but half of it was soaked anyway. The fire sputtered and died, and with it went whatever little sense of safety we had left. That night, the storm turned violent, wind tearing through the trees, thunder cracking like the earth itself was angry. We huddled together in the van, the sound of rain hammering the roof so loud it drowned our voices. I could see lightning flash through the foggy windshield, illuminating the forest for split seconds. And every time it did, I swore I saw something out there. Shapes moving between the trees, too large to be animals, too quiet to be human. Chloe cried silently, whispering prayers under her breath, while Ryan kept one hand on the door like he was ready to fight whatever came. I tried to close my eyes, but every time I drifted off, I'd hear whispers, soft, almost rhythmic, like chanting in a language I didn't know. At first I thought it was a storm, or maybe my brain just short-circuiting from fear, but then I realized they were too clear, too deliberate. I heard them right by my ear, a woman's voice whispering my name. When I jolted awake, no one else had heard it. The rain stopped suddenly around dawn, like someone had flipped a switch. The air was cold and thick with mist. We stepped outside, our clothes sticking to our skin, and that's when we saw it. More symbols. The same spiral markings carved into at least 6 different trees around the clearing. Some were higher, some lower, but all perfectly aligned, like they'd been waiting for us to notice. "What the hell is this?" Ryan muttered, tracing one with his finger. "It's like they're multiplying. They're forming a path," I said without even thinking. He looked at me like I'd lost it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a pattern. They weren't random. They pointed in one direction, deeper into the forest. "Maybe it's leading to help," I said. "Or at least something." Chloe nearly screamed at me. "Are you insane? We're not following creepy death symbols into the woods." But I couldn't ignore the pull. That sick intuition that maybe, just maybe, following the marks was our only shot at finding Ellis or Nate or anyone. After an hour of arguing, Ryan sided with me, saying, "We can't just sit here waiting to die." And reluctantly, Chloe followed. We packed what little food we had left, 2 protein bars, a few crackers, 1 bottle of water each, and started walking. The air got colder the farther we went. I kept marking trees with small scratches using Ryan's pocket knife so we wouldn't get lost. But every time I looked back, it felt like the forest had swallowed them again. After maybe 2 hours, we reached a slope that descended into a kind of hollow. The ground there was covered in bones, small ones, like animal remains, but arranged in strange patterns, circles and spirals matching the symbols on the trees. Chloe started shaking. "We need to go back, now," but I couldn't move. In the middle of the hollow stood something that froze my blood. An altar, or what looked like one. It was made of stone stacked neatly, almost like a shrine, and on top were objects, half-burned candles, bits of clothing, and a rusted locket with a picture inside. I picked it up. The photo inside was faded, but I could still make out the face of a young woman. Her eyes had been scratched out. Ryan whispered, "What is this place?" And I said the only thing that made sense. "It's where they've been." "They?" he asked, but I didn't have an answer. I just knew we weren't supposed to be there. There were markings all over the rocks, the same jagged spirals, but thicker, deeper, like they'd been carved in with rage. The air smelled metallic, and there were flies buzzing around something behind the altar. Ryan moved closer, and when he pushed aside the branches, we saw it. Something wrapped in plastic, the shape unmistakably human. Chloe screamed. I think that's when we all snapped. Ryan grabbed my hand, yelling, "We're leaving now," and we ran, crashing through the trees, slipping in mud, not caring which direction we went anymore. The forest seemed endless. Every shadow looked alive. We finally collapsed in another clearing, miles from where we started, panting, soaked, and shaking. The sun was starting to set again, though I could barely tell through the thick clouds. "We can't go back," Ryan said, between breaths. "We'll just stay here tonight. Start again in the morning." We made a small fire using what dry wood we could find, but no one spoke. Chloe wouldn't stop staring at the tree line, muttering, "They're watching us." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that there was no they, but I didn't believe it myself anymore. At some point, Ryan went to refill his bottle at a nearby stream, saying he'd be right back. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. "He's taking too long," I said, getting up, but Chloe grabbed my arm. "Don't go out there, please." I pulled free anyway. He could be hurt. I followed the faint sound of water, calling his name softly. The stream was shallow, glinting silver under the fading light, but Ryan wasn't there. His bottle lay half buried in the mud. My heart started racing. Then, from behind me, I heard something move. I turned, flashlight trembling in my hand, and caught a glimpse of something darting between the trees. Too fast, too silent. I shouted his name again, my voice cracking. That's when I heard it, a guttural sound, not human, followed by a thud. I ran toward it, tripping over roots, and then I saw him. Ryan was on the ground, struggling against something I could barely make out in the dark. A tall figure, pale, thin, its face obscured. I screamed, swinging the flashlight, and the light caught its eyes. Glassy, reflective, inhuman. It turned toward me, and I swear it smiled, before bolting into the trees with impossible speed. Ryan was gasping, bleeding from his shoulder, his shirt torn open. It grabbed me. he stammered. It had hands, but wrong. Too long. I helped him back to camp, half carrying him, Chloe crying when she saw the blood. We tried to clean the wound with what little water we had left, but it looked deep, like something had tried to rip his arm off. He kept saying, "It wasn't human. Mia, it wasn't human." I didn't know what to say. That night, we didn't sleep at all. Ryan sat against a log, clutching his shoulder, his skin pale and sweaty. Chloe prayed under her breath, whispering names I didn't recognize. I sat there, flashlight in hand, staring at the woods. Every so often, I saw movement, shadows flickering just beyond the firelight, too quiet to be animals, too deliberate to be the wind. I thought about the journal we found in the cabin, about the line that said, "They come at night." And now I knew exactly what that meant, because when the fire started dying, I heard them again. The whispers, closer this time, circling us, blending with the crackle of the flames. Chloe covered her ears, crying, "Make it stop!" And Ryan whispered, "They're not going to let us leave." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that we'd find a way out, but I couldn't even convince myself. The forest had us. And the worst part, it felt like it wanted us to stay. I woke up to the sound of a steady beep, the smell of antiseptic stinging my nose, and a fluorescent light burning my eyes when I tried to open them. For a second, I thought it was rain on the tent again, or that I was still in the woods with the cold biting at my skin. But when I turned my head and saw the IV in my arm, the white hospital sheets, and the nurse gasping, "Oh my God, she's awake," I realized I wasn't out there anymore. My throat felt raw, like I hadn't spoken in days. And when I croaked out, "Where am I?" my voice barely sounded like mine. "St. Mary's Hospital," the nurse said softly. "You've been unconscious for 4 days." 4 days? My mind scrambled to piece together what happened. The woods, the blood, Ryan's scream, Chloe shaking hands, and then nothing. I shot up suddenly, pain flashing through my ribs. "Where's Ryan? Where's Chloe? Did they find them?" The nurse froze, her eyes flicking away. "You need to rest," she said, her tone too careful. That's when the police officer entered. He looked exhausted, his badge slightly crooked, holding a notebook filled with scrawls. "Miss Bennett," he said, "I'm Detective Hollis. You were found on a forest road about 12 miles from the state highway. Can you tell me what happened out there?" I wanted to. I really did, but my mouth went dry. How could I even begin? How do you explain the impossible? "We were on a college trip," I started slowly. "Our Professor Ellis, he took us on a route through the national forest. Something went wrong. He disappeared. Then Nate, Chloe, and Ryan..." My voice cracked. Hollis nodded, scribbling something down. "The others haven't been located yet," he said quietly. "We recovered some personal belongings and a burned-out campsite, but no signs of struggle. No bodies." My head spun. "That's not possible," I whispered. "There was blood. Ryan was attacked. I saw..." Hollis raised a hand. "Miss Bennett, you've been through a traumatic experience. You were dehydrated, disoriented. The doctors say it's common to experience hallucinations under those conditions." Hallucinations! That word made something cold crawl up my spine. I wanted to scream that I knew what I saw, that I wasn't crazy, but my body was too weak, and when Hollis gave me that polite, skeptical smile, I realized he didn't believe a word of it. Over the next few days, the hospital became my world. Monitors beeping, nurses checking vitals, therapists asking how I felt about what happened. News outlets called it the Crater Lake tragedy. They said we'd gone off course during a college trip, that a storm caused us to get lost, that environmental factors led to my friends' presumed deaths. They called me the sole survivor. Every time I saw my name on the TV screen, it felt like they were talking about someone else. The college sent flowers, a counselor, and a statement about deep sorrow and ongoing investigations. But I couldn't stop thinking about that cabin, those carved symbols, the whispers in the trees. None of it was in the police report. When I asked about the cabin, Detective Hollis said, "We searched the coordinates you mentioned. There's no structure there." I insisted. He sent a photo from their search. Just endless trees, no sign of what I'd seen. I started doubting myself, thinking maybe I had dreamed it, until something strange happened on my 3rd day home. I was sitting on my bed, trying to scroll through my old photos, deleting trip pictures because I couldn't bear to look at them, when a new message popped up on my phone from an unknown number. The message had no text, just a photo. My blood ran cold when I opened it. It was a picture of us taken the night before we left for the trip. Outside the van, Ryan was goofing off. Chloe was laughing. I was looking at the camera. The thing is, I didn't remember anyone taking that picture. I tried to tell myself it might have been one of the others, but then another message came through. A photo of me asleep in my tent, the faint outline of the forest in the background. That picture had been taken from outside the tent. My chest tightened, my hands shaking as I dialed Hollis. When he picked up, I stammered, "Someone's sending me photos from the trip." He said he'd sent someone to check, but by the time the officers arrived, the number had disappeared, the photos gone from my gallery. They told me to take a break from social media. Days passed. I started locking every door, keeping my phone face down. But then little things began happening. The porch light would flicker when I stepped outside. My front door would be unlocked in the morning, though I knew I locked it. One night, I found a muddy footprint on my kitchen floor. Bare, human, and definitely not mine. I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamed of the forest again. The carved symbols, the whispers calling my name. and Professor Ellis's voice saying, "You shouldn't have looked." I tried to convince myself it was trauma, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something had followed me back. 2 weeks after my release, I went to visit the college counselor. Her office smelled like lavender and paper. I told her about the messages, the dreams, the feeling of being watched. She nodded sympathetically, jotting things down on her notepad. "Mia," she said gently, "survivor's guilt can manifest in vivid ways. Your mind is trying to make sense of what happened." I nodded, pretending to agree, but when I looked up, I noticed something strange. A photograph behind her desk. It was an old faculty photo, and standing in the back row, half hidden, was Professor Ellis. Only the nameplate said he'd resigned 5 years ago. "Did you know him?" I asked quietly. The counselor looked surprised. "Who?" "Professor Ellis," I said, pointing. She frowned. "That's Dr. Carmine. He taught environmental psychology years ago. He passed away before I started working here." My heart dropped. The man in that photo wasn't Carmine. I'd seen his face every day during the trip. I went home and pulled out my backpack, the one they'd found me with. Inside was my ruined journal, some mud-soaked clothes, and a small folded piece of paper I didn't remember packing. When I opened it, I nearly dropped it. It was a hand-drawn map of the forest, the same routes we took, with the same symbols marked along the trees. But at the end of the route, in shaky handwriting, it said they never left. The paper smelled faintly of smoke. I didn't tell anyone about it. Instead, I drove back out there a week later. Maybe it was stupid, maybe suicidal, but I had to know. The forest looked different in daylight. Peaceful, almost innocent. But as I parked near the old ranger station and started walking, the air grew colder. Every crack of a branch made my pulse race. After an hour, I found it. The clearing. The one where we'd made camp. Only now, there were no signs of fire. No tents. Nothing. It was like we'd never been there. But when I looked closely at one of the trees, I saw something carved faintly beneath the moss. A symbol, the same one from before, half worn but real. My hands trembled as I traced it. "I knew it," I whispered. And then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, heart pounding, but no one was there. Just the forest swaying. Then a soft click. I looked down. My phone screen had lit up on its own. Camera open, front facing, and for a split second, before I dropped it in shock, I saw something in the reflection. A figure behind me, standing just at the edge of the trees, watching. I spun around, but they were gone. I ran, branches cutting my arms, my breath ragged, until I reached my car. When I got home, I found another message waiting for me. No text, just another photo. It was me, standing in front of that same tree in the clearing, taken from behind. My blood turned to ice. Someone had been there. That night, I didn't sleep. I packed a bag and decided to leave town. I drove east until sunrise, checking my mirrors every few miles, half expecting headlights to appear behind me. I rented a small apartment under a fake name in a different city, changed my number, deleted social media. But even now, I still get that feeling sometimes, when I'm walking home from work or when I close the curtains and catch a flicker of movement outside. A few weeks ago, I got an email from a university address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Your paper on human behavior under duress was impressive." I opened it. The message inside only had one line: "I told you not to look." No name, no signature, but I knew that voice. I'd heard it in the forest. Last night, I found something even worse. I was unpacking an old box from the trip, things the college had mailed me after the investigation closed, and inside, under the folded tarp, was a flash drive. I hesitated, then plugged it into my laptop. It contained dozens of photos, not the ones I'd taken. These were from someone else's camera. They showed us from a distance, walking through the forest, eating by the fire, sleeping in our tents. The last few were darker. Grainy shots of Ryan being dragged, Chloe screaming, me passed out by the fire. The final image made me drop my laptop. It was a picture of me in the hospital, unconscious, taken through the window. I don't know who's sending them or how they're finding me, but I'm done trying to explain it to people who think I'm crazy. I've changed cities 3 times now, and somehow, the messages keep following. Last week, I came home to find an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a single Polaroid. Professor Ellis standing on a city street, looking straight into the camera. On the back, someone had written, "See you soon, Mia." I don't know what's real anymore, but I know this. Whatever happened out there, it didn't end in the forest. It followed me back. And sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I can hear footsteps just outside my window and the faint whisper of someone calling my name. Like the woods are reminding me I was never supposed to leave. The end. I was ignored and undervalued by everyone until I proved them wrong. I don't think anyone ever really saw me growing up. Not really. I was always there, but in that background kind of way. Like the quiet hum of a fridge that no one notices until it stops working. My name's Yoon Park. I'm 23 now, but this story starts way before that, back when I was the invisible girl in Koreatown, Los Angeles. My parents moved from Seoul when I was 7, chasing that vague promise of a better life, though all it gave us was exhaustion wrapped in fluorescent light. They ran a small dry cleaning shop, sandwiched between a nail salon and a liquor store, and that tiny, bleach-scented place was where most of my childhood happened. I used to do my homework in the back, on a table with a leg held up by folded cardboard, sketching people who came and went, old women clutching dresses that had seen better days, men with wrinkled shirts and tired eyes, moms who looked like they were holding the world together with one free hand. Art was my escape even then. But my parents didn't see it that way. To them, art was a hobby, something soft and impractical, like daydreaming during work hours. You can draw after studying, my mom would say, her voice half love, half warning. My dad barely looked up from the register. Doctors make money, not artists, he'd add, without even realizing how those words pressed against my ribs like weights. So I learned early to draw in silence, to make myself smaller when I was most alive. When I got accepted to UCLA for graphic design, I thought things would finally change. I imagined people seeing me, like really seeing me for the first time. But college didn't feel like a rebirth. It felt like an upgraded version of invisibility. My classmates were loud, confident, dressed like their clothes had stories. They all seemed to know each other, like they'd been chosen for a show I wasn't invited to. I tried to fit in, sitting quietly in group projects, offering ideas that floated through the air unnoticed until someone louder repeated them and got credit. "Oh my God, that's such a great idea, Josh," our professor would say, even though I just said the same thing 30 seconds earlier. It became a game. Guess how quickly my thoughts could disappear. There was this one time in sophomore year when we had to design an ad campaign for a sustainable brand. I spent nights sketching concepts, watercolor textures, layered with digital patterns, something I felt captured tradition meeting modern life. When I presented it, my professor, Mr. Thompson, squinted at my board and said, "It's nice, but it feels unpolished. Maybe next time, try something more commercial." Then he moved on like I hadn't just spent 4 nights surviving on ramen and caffeine to make that piece breathe. I smiled like it didn't matter, but inside, something cracked. The class star was a girl named Madison. Blonde, outspoken, the kind of person who walked into a room and made people adjust their posture. She wasn't cruel, not directly, but her compliments always had sharp edges. "I love your style, Yoon," she once said. "It's so minimalist. Like, you don't try too hard." It sounded like a compliment until you realize she meant my work lacked effort. Everyone gravitated toward her, even the professors. She was UCLA's rising design talent, while I was that quiet Korean girl who's good at drawing flowers. I laughed it off when friends joked I should teach Madison how to do digital shading. They didn't know she once hovered behind me during lab hours, watching me sketch a concept for our final portfolio assignment. She asked a few questions, where I got inspiration, how I layered textures, and I answered because I thought she respected me, maybe even liked my ideas. I didn't know that same design would reappear, slightly modified in her submission 2 weeks later. When she presented it, I froze. It was mine. My concept, my composition, my color palette, the same faded brush texture I'd spent hours perfecting. But she added her name, her logo, her confident voice, and the room erupted in applause. Mr. Thompson said, "That's brilliant, Madison. Truly original." My throat burned, but I couldn't say a word. I just sat there, smiling through the kind of pain that has no sound. After class, I confronted her quietly, in the hallway that smelled faintly of printer ink. "You used my design," I said. She blinked at me, pretending confusion. "Oh my God. No, Yoon. I was inspired by your concept, sure, but it's totally different. Everyone borrows ideas. That's how art works." She said it like she was explaining something simple to a child. I wanted to scream, but all I did was nod and walk away, hating myself for being too timid, too nice, too scared of conflict. A week later, she got the internship I'd been working for, the one at a boutique design firm downtown that promised career-defining exposure. She posted about it on Instagram with a caption, "Hard work pays off # dream job." I stared at that post for hours, feeling my chest collapse. I tried to tell my professor what happened, but he brushed it off. "That's a serious accusation, Yun. Are you sure you didn't just have similar ideas?" His tone made it clear I was wasting his time, so I let it go. I stopped attending critique sessions for a while, submitting my work online to avoid the humiliation. My grades slipped, my confidence evaporated, and I started believing maybe they were right. Maybe I was forgettable. My family didn't notice the change. They were too busy working late, counting receipts, complaining about rent hikes. When I told my mom about the stolen project, she sighed and said, "That's life, Yuna. You need to toughen up. You can't let small things bother you." Small things. My dreams were small things. I laughed it off, but that night I sat in bed staring at my sketchbook, wondering if art was just a curse disguised as a calling. The thing about being invisible is that after a while, you start fading even to yourself. I stopped dressing the way I liked, stopped volunteering ideas in class, stopped drawing for fun. My notebooks filled with half-finished sketches and bitterness. My few friends, if you could call them that, stopped inviting me to hangouts because I always said no. One evening, during a group critique, Mr. Thompson paired me with Madison again, like some cruel cosmic joke. She smiled, overly friendly, and said, "I'm sure you'll do great this time, Yoon." Something in me snapped a little. I stayed quiet, though, nodding like always. We finished our assignment, and she got her usual praise. But when it came to me, the professor skimmed my submission for 10 seconds and said, "You have potential, but your work lacks energy, as if my whole being wasn't draining itself into every piece I made. After class, I remember walking across campus under those blinding California lights, the kind that make everything look too clean. I sat by the art building fountain, staring at the reflection of neon signs flickering from the cafe across the street. I thought about quitting, about telling my parents that they were right, that art didn't love me back. I imagined myself working at the dry cleaning shop forever, folding other people's clothes while my own dreams collected dust. My phone buzzed with a message from my mom. "Can you bring rice from market?" And another from a class group chat. Madison's piece got featured in the campus newsletter. So proud of her. I turned off my phone and cried quietly. The kind of crying where you don't even make sound because you're afraid someone might notice. Invisibility has its own kind of suffocation. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's slow, creeping, quiet. It teaches you to smile while your insides crumble. I started sketching strangers again. On the bus, in the laundromat, at the cafe. I told myself it was just to pass time, but really it was survival. I needed to remember I existed. I'd draw people's eyes, their wrinkles, the way light touched them, because maybe if I could see them, someone would one day see me. Still, that semester ended with me barely passing. Mr. Thompson's final comment on my portfolio read, "You have technical skill, but no voice." No voice. That line haunted me. I wanted to scream that I did have a voice, that he just never listened. But the world doesn't pause for quiet girls. It keeps moving, leaving them behind like ghosts. By summer, I was working part-time at a bubble tea shop to pay off tuition debt. My shifts were long, sticky, full of smiling at customers who barely looked at me. Sometimes UCLA students came in, laughing about internships and projects, ordering the same drink Madison had posted about on her Instagram story. I'd watch them leave, each one carrying the kind of confidence I'd never known. My boss would call me sweet but slow, and coworkers treated me like furniture. It became a loop: work, home, draw, sleep, repeat. My parents thought I was lazy for not finding a real job, and every dinner conversation turned into a fight. "We didn't come to America for this," my dad would say. "You're wasting your time. Art doesn't pay rent." I wanted to tell him art was the only thing keeping me from disappearing completely. But instead, I said nothing. Just like always. One night, I was cleaning up after closing when a girl came in, clearly drunk, laughing, spilling her drink, and complaining her boyfriend left her. I drew her without thinking, a quick sketch on the back of a receipt just to capture the chaos in her eyes. When I handed it to her, she stopped laughing. "You drew this?" she asked softly. I nodded. She stared at it for a while, then said, "That's actually beautiful." It was the first genuine compliment I'd heard in months. She took a photo and posted it, tagging me. The next day, that photo had over 200 likes, and strangers commented things like, "She's talented," and "Who is this artist?" For a brief moment, the fog lifted. Someone saw me. Just for a second, but it felt like oxygen after drowning. Still, the world didn't suddenly change. I didn't wake up famous or confident. I still went to work, still heard my parents' disappointment echoing through every phone call. But that little moment planted something. A spark. I began drawing more customers, posting my sketches online anonymously under the handle at unseenbun. I didn't expect anything from it. It was just my way of saying, I exist. But in that quiet rebellion, something inside me started shifting. The invisible girl was still there, bruised and quiet, but she'd started whispering back to the world that ignored her. And somewhere deep down, I felt a pulse I hadn't felt in years. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't done yet. After that one little viral post, I thought maybe things would start to change, but life has this weird way of reminding you that miracles don't show up on schedule. The cafe where I worked became my second home. Not because I loved it, but because I couldn't afford to be anywhere else. I was 23, living in a tiny studio apartment that smelled like instant noodles and acrylic paint, surrounded by half-finished sketches taped to the walls like they were holding the place together. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of traffic and the hum of my mini fridge, drag myself into a wrinkled uniform, and head to the cafe. My boss, a guy named Jordan who wore too much cologne and thought he was the next Elon Musk for running a coffee shop, used to tell me I looked tired in an artsy way. Translation, I looked like crap. I'd smile and say, thanks, because at least it meant he noticed me at all. But what no one saw was how close I was to breaking the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from working long hours, but from feeling like you're running in circles while everyone else is moving forward. Job rejections became part of my daily routine. I'd spend nights polishing my portfolio, sending it out to agencies and small studios with hope tucked between each line of my cover letters. Most never replied. The few that did sent the same soulless emails. We appreciate your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates. Sometimes they didn't even bother pretending to care. I'd check my inbox at the end of every shift, standing behind the counter with cold coffee in hand, watching that little red notification disappear with another rejection. It got to the point where I stopped expecting good news altogether. Bills piled up on my nightstand, electricity, rent, student loans, each envelope heavier than the last. I started skipping meals to save money, eating one big dinner after work and pretending I wasn't hungry during the day. My mom called once a week, asking when I was going to get a real job. I told her I was working on it, even though every working on it felt more like a lie. I didn't tell her that I'd spent 2 nights crying in the shower because the water drowned out the sound. Still, I kept sketching. I didn't know why. Maybe habit, maybe defiance. I'd draw customers while pretending to wipe tables, capturing quick outlines of people lost in their phones or laughter. Sometimes I'd gift the drawings to them. Most didn't care. A few smiled politely, but once in a while, I'd see that spark, that moment where someone realized they mattered enough to be seen. One afternoon, an elderly woman came in wearing a floral scarf and trembling hands. She ordered chamomile tea and sat by the window, staring at nothing. Something about her face, the quiet sadness in it, pulled at me. I sketched her. Soft lines and gentle strokes, making sure to capture her eyes, those eyes that looked like they'd seen everything and nothing all at once. When I handed her the sketch, she stared at it for a long time. Then she started crying. I panicked, thinking I'd offended her, but she took my hand and said, "No one's looked at me like this in years." She asked if she could keep it, and I said, "Of course." Later that night, she posted it on Facebook. Her granddaughter tagged me, and by morning, the post had thousands of likes. Someone on Twitter reposted it, writing, "This artist captures souls." For the first time, my name, or at least my handle, at Unseen by Yoon meant something. My notifications exploded. People started messaging me for commissions, small things at first, pet portraits, anniversary gifts, digital avatars. I worked every night after my cafe shift, sitting cross-legged on my bed with my tablet, drawing until my hand cramped. It wasn't glamorous. Clients would haggle over prices, ask for one more revision like I was a machine. I once did a full digital painting for $25, and the client ghosted me after asking for 5 changes. But even then, I couldn't stop. Because for once, I was being seen. My follower count grew slowly, then faster. People started DMing me things like, "Your art feels alive," and "I can't believe you're not famous yet." Those little comments felt like breadcrumbs leading me out of the dark. Then came Ava. She was an influencer, the kind with 200K followers, aesthetic feeds, and captions about manifesting abundance. She DM'd me one night with the kind of message that makes your heart skip. "Hey Yoon, I adore your work. I'm launching a mental health awareness campaign and would love for you to collaborate." She said it would be great exposure and that she'd tag me in every post. I hesitated. I'd learned the hard way that exposure doesn't pay rent, but she promised to pay me a small fee too. It wasn't much, but it was something. We talked over Zoom and she was charming, too charming. She said I reminded her of herself when she was just starting out, which made me feel special. I worked for 2 weeks straight, creating digital portraits representing different mental health struggles, anxiety, grief, self-acceptance, each piece layered with emotion. I poured everything into it. When she saw the final art, she said it was perfect. I remember smiling for the first time in weeks. Then the campaign launched. Her feed was filled with my art, reposted thousands of times, but my name wasn't there. No tag, no credit, just her caption, "So proud of my new project, art by me." I thought it was a mistake at first. Maybe she'd fix it. I messaged her, politely pointing it out. No reply. Then she blocked me. Just like that. I felt my stomach drop. I stared at her posts, at my own art now branded under her name, and something inside me cracked open, not sadness this time, but anger, the kind that burned slow but steady. Comments flooded her page, praising her talent, calling her so creative. I watched my work, my emotions, my hours of effort being stolen again, and I realized I'd been too trusting, too quiet, too desperate for validation. That night, I sat in my room surrounded by sketches, screens, and silence. I felt every inch of that betrayal. The humiliation of being used again hit me harder than any rejection ever could. But underneath it, there was a strange calm. Like the part of me that used to cry had run out of tears and decided to fight instead. I opened my old sketchbook and flipped through pages of faces, strangers, customers, people who never knew they'd been drawn. Unseen. I whispered to myself. That word had always followed me, defined me. But maybe it could become something else. Maybe unseen wasn't about being ignored. Maybe it was about shining light on people like me. That's when the idea for my own project was born. I didn't have a plan yet, just a feeling that I needed to create something that no one could take from me. I started studying digital storytelling, watching YouTube tutorials, learning how to build simple web pages. Every free second between cafe shifts and freelance gigs went into planning what I later called Unseen Faces. It wasn't about fame or revenge, not yet. It was about reclaiming my voice. I wanted to tell stories of people who lived in the margins, who worked hard and stayed invisible. People like my parents, my coworkers, even the customers I served coffee to every day. But before that spark could ignite, the darkness got worse. Bills still haunted me. The influencer incident made me paranoid. Every new client felt like a potential thief. I started declining commissions, too scared to trust anyone. My mom found out I wasn't earning enough to cover my share of rent and told me I should move back home. I said no, not because I didn't need help, but because I needed space to fail on my own terms. Nights became endless loops of regret. I'd stare at my reflection in the laptop screen, seeing a tired face with dark circles, wondering what the point of it all was. But then I'd look at the drawings, the old woman from the cafe, the laughing strangers, the tiny details of humanity I'd captured, and something in me whispered, don't quit yet. So I didn't. I kept posting, not for followers, not for money, but for the promise that somewhere, someone might see themselves in my lines. I used my pain like ink, my exhaustion like shading. Every time someone left a kind comment, it was like a heartbeat reminding me I still existed. Then one day, I got an email from a small magazine that had seen my viral cafe drawing months ago. They wanted to feature my story, not the influencer, not the theft me. It wasn't much, just a local feature, but they called my work emotionally resonant and socially conscious. For the first time, someone used the words I've been waiting to hear my whole life. You have a voice. That email didn't solve my problems. I was still broke, still tired, still anxious about everything, but it did something deeper. It lit a fire. I printed it out and pinned it above my desk as a reminder that even if the world tried to erase me, I could write myself back in. That night, I stayed up till sunrise, sketching again, planning, dreaming. My lines were bolder, my strokes steadier. I realized I didn't want to just survive anymore. I wanted to rise, and not quietly this time. No one was ever going to steal my voice again. That was the night Invisible Yun Park died, and the artist who would prove them all wrong was born. When I finally launched Unseen Faces, I didn't expect it to change my life. I just wanted to survive another day without feeling invisible. But the night I hit post on that first digital portrait, something inside me shifted. Like I'd opened a door I wasn't meant to find yet. The first story was of Mr. Kim, a janitor from my old apartment building who worked double shifts to send money to his kids back in Busan. I'd drawn him sitting on a bus, half asleep, hands still calloused, eyes drooping but proud. Underneath, I wrote a caption. He cleans the buildings people walk through without noticing, but he's building dreams back home. It wasn't meant to go viral, but within hours it started spreading. Reposted, shared, commented on by strangers who said they saw their fathers, their uncles, their neighbors in his face. By the end of the week, it had 50,000 likes. Then 100,000. Then BuzzFeed reached out for a short feature. I remember sitting in my cafe uniform, apron still on, reading that email like it was written in another language. For the first time, people weren't just looking at my art, they were feeling it. I turned the project into a series, uploading a new face every 3 days. A street vendor, an undocumented delivery driver, a nurse who worked through COVID while being harassed for her accent. Each post carried a piece of me too. The quiet parts, the aching parts. Suddenly, Unseen Faces wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd ever been overlooked. But with attention came the noise. It started small. DMs from followers thanking me for representing real people. Then collaboration offers from small brands wanting to partner with my movement. I turned them down. Something about monetizing those stories felt wrong. Still, my follower count shot past 200K in 2 months. People began calling me an art activist, which made me laugh because I still couldn't afford a proper tablet stand. My tiny apartment turned into a makeshift studio. Sketches pinned across walls, sticky notes with story ideas, half-empty mugs everywhere. I barely slept, surviving on caffeine and adrenaline, but for the first time, it didn't feel like exhaustion. It felt like purpose. Then came the trolls. Why are all your subjects immigrants? One comment said, you're playing the victim card. Another wrote, not everything has to be about race. There were hate threads about me, accusing me of faking stories, using poverty aesthetics for clout. I tried ignoring them, but late at night, those words crawled under my skin. It hurt. People loved you one day and tore you apart the next. And then, when I thought I'd built something untouchable, the past came clawing back. A small Twitter account posted side-by-side pictures. My old design from UCLA and Madison's stolen original. The caption read, remember when this influencer copied Wenxin Baiyun's college project? Guess who's famous now? The post exploded. Within hours, people were tagging me, tagging her, demanding justice. Madison, now a mid-tier design influencer with brand deals, posted an apology story that wasn't really an apology. I'm sorry if my old project resembled someone else's, but inspiration is everywhere. My DMs filled with screenshots, messages from old classmates saying they always knew I was talented. Suddenly, everyone wanted to take my side. But where were they when I was invisible? The hypocrisy stung, but I saw an opportunity buried in the chaos. I made a post that night, just a black background with white text. Inspiration is not theft. Acknowledgement is not weakness. Stories aren't just art. They're lived experiences. Credit matters. Then I added a carousel of my old sketch, the one she stole, beside my new Unseen Faces pieces. I ended it with a line that burned straight from my heart. This is what happens when you stop letting others own your voice. That post broke the internet. News outlets picked it up. Podcasts invited me for interviews. People wrote essays about cultural appropriation and the exploitation of immigrant artists. I wasn't just the girl who got copied anymore. I was the girl who turned plagiarism into poetry. Of course, my parents didn't get it at first. My mom called after reading an article that said I was the new face of digital activism. She said, Yun-ah, are you sure this is good? You're fighting with people online? What if it ruins your reputation? I told her, Alma, for once in my life, people are listening. I can't be quiet now. There was just silence on the phone before she said softly, just don't forget to eat. My dad still didn't say much. I think he didn't know how to process success that didn't come in a paycheck. But when a Korean newspaper in LA ran a feature titled From Dry Cleaning Shop to Global Stage, the artist who drew her way out, I found a copy folded on their counter the next time I visited home. My dad didn't say anything, just pointed at the article and gave this half nod that said more than words ever could. By month 5, Unseen Faces had become a movement. Artists from other countries started tagging me, sharing their own interpretations. Hashtags like #UnseenProject and #FacesOfMigration trended globally. People sent me their family stories from Brazil, India, Mexico, and Nigeria, asking if I'd draw them. I couldn't keep up, but I tried. I'd sit at my desk until 3 a.m., headphones in, sketching with tears drying on my cheeks. Each story was raw, painful, beautiful. I began hosting live streams, talking about the people behind the art. For the first time, my voice didn't tremble when I spoke. I collaborated with a nonprofit that supported immigrant workers, donating part of my digital art sales to their fund. That was the first time my art actually paid rent. I remember sitting on my bed with the first real paycheck, whispering, I did this. Not Madison, not Ava, me. But fame is a double-edged blade. With every viral post came people who wanted a piece of me. Influencers suddenly wanted to collaborate again, some even pretending to have been my friends from UCLA. One of them, a popular art vlogger named Bree, DM'd me, saying she'd love to amplify my message. Against my better judgment, I agreed to an interview. She seemed nice at first, bubbly, curious, the type who calls everyone babe. But when the video came out, it was edited to make her the hero of the story. My words were cut, my sentences rephrased, and the title read, Influencer Helps Unknown Artist Speak Out. I felt sick watching it. I realized that no matter how far I climbed, people would still try to take credit for my voice. But this time, I didn't stay silent. I commented directly on her post, Unknown Artist. Funny, I thought I was the one you interviewed. My followers flooded her comments, defending me, calling her out for manipulation. She deleted the video within hours. I didn't enjoy the drama, but I learned something that day. Silence is comfortable for everyone except the one who's silenced. The backlash only fueled me more. I started using my art as armor. Every insult, every criticism, every fake apology, I turned into lines, colors, and emotion. I created a series called Louder Now, featuring portraits of Asian women who'd been told to be quiet their whole lives. Each face looked straight at the viewer, unapologetic. That series became my loudest roar yet. International galleries began reaching out. My work was displayed in New York, London, Seoul. I couldn't believe it. I went from sketching on cafe napkins to seeing my pieces framed under spotlights. When I flew to New York for my first exhibition, I stood in the corner of the room, watching people admire my art, whispering about the stories behind them, and I realized something. This was my revenge. Not the bitter kind, the poetic kind. Every time someone said, her work made me cry, it was another crack healing inside me. But the internet doesn't let you live in peace for long. One night, a journalist dug up my collaboration with Ava, the influencer who'd stolen my work years ago, and wrote an expose implying that I had once been complicit in social media exploitation. It twisted the story to make me sound like a hypocrite. For a moment, I panicked. What if people believed it? What if all my progress disappeared overnight? But then I remembered, truth doesn't need to scream, it just needs to stand its ground. So I did what I always do when the world tries to rewrite me. I drew. I made a piece called Hands That Built Their Own Names. It showed two hands, one stealing, one creating, but the one creating was brighter. Unstoppable like fire. I posted it with a caption, when they rewrite your story, pick up your own pen. That post went more viral than anything I'd ever made. Even Ava commented, this is powerful, to which someone replied, you should know you inspired it. After that, things exploded. Global publications featured me. A major brand offered to fund an Unseen Faces mural project across major US cities. Suddenly, I was in meetings with people who used words like partnership, equity, and vision. I wasn't sure I belonged in those rooms, but I showed up anyway. I wasn't invisible anymore, and I wasn't apologizing for it. Still, the fame didn't fix the quiet loneliness that followed me home. Success doesn't erase the ache, it just makes it louder in nicer rooms. I'd sit on my couch at 2 a.m., scrolling through praise and hate, feeling both full and empty. But then I'd open my messages and find notes from immigrant kids saying, you made me want to draw again. Or, my mom cried, seeing your art. And suddenly, the emptiness didn't win. Months later, I was invited to speak at a design conference in San Francisco, the same event Madison once bragged she'd attend years ago. I walked on stage trembling, but when I looked at the crowd, hundreds of young artists staring back, I realized I wasn't scared anymore. I told them about invisibility, about theft, about building something out of brokenness. I told them how people would try to silence you, steal from you, doubt you, but that none of it mattered if you kept creating anyway. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. For the first time, I didn't feel like a background character. I felt like the whole damn story. That night, I stood by my hotel window, watching the city lights blur into gold. And I thought about that quiet girl from Koreatown who once cried by the art building fountain, thinking her voice didn't matter. She'd never believed this life was hers, but it was. And it wasn't luck. It was the fire built from every rejection, every stolen piece, every "you're not enough." The world that once ignored me now couldn't stop watching. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was unstoppable. When I walked through the iron gates of UCLA again, the air felt different, lighter, warmer, like the universe had been holding its breath for this exact moment, and finally exhaled as I stepped onto the same pathway I once used to drag myself across, invisible, unheard, and full of doubt. My heels clicked against the pavement where my old sneakers used to shuffle. My name was printed on banners that read, "Guest speaker, Yoon Park, founder of Unseen Faces." I stopped in front of the art building, the same one where Madison had stolen my project years ago. The same one where professors once brushed past me like I didn't exist. And it hit me. Not anger, not revenge, just this deep, quiet pride. I'd spent years thinking the greatest joy would come from proving everyone wrong. But standing there, with the autumn leaves rustling and students whispering my name as they passed, I realized the real joy was in proving myself right, that I was always meant for more, even when no one else saw it. When I walked into the auditorium, hundreds of faces turned toward me, some eager, some curious, all waiting for me to speak. My heart thudded like it was my first day of class again, but this time, I was the one at the podium. I started by telling them the truth. Not the glamorized version of my story, not the viral headline one, but the raw, messy, sleepless reality of what it took to get here. I talked about rejection emails, about sketching on cafe napkins during breaks, about crying in my car after being told I wasn't original enough. And then I told them how I turned pain into purpose, how I built Unseen Faces not for fame, but because I was tired of pretending I was okay with being invisible. The room was silent the whole time except for the soft scratch of pens and the quiet sniffles from the back rows. When I showed them the last slide, a photo of Mr. Kim, the janitor who started it all, I said, this was never about making art people liked. It was about making art people felt. The audience stood up before I even finished, clapping, cheering, and for a moment I just stood there, blinking back tears, because I wasn't sure how to hold that kind of love. After the event, I walked outside to find my parents waiting near the courtyard. My mom was dressed in her favorite floral henbok scarf, eyes already glistening, and my dad stood stiffly beside her holding a small camera, like he didn't quite know what to do with it. "You were amazing," my mom said, grabbing my hands like she used to when I came home from kindergarten art shows. "Everyone was looking at you." My dad didn't say much, but when I hugged him, he cleared his throat and muttered, "You spoke well." For a man who once told me art was just a hobby, that was the loudest praise I could ever get. That night, they came to my exhibition, the first one they'd ever attended in person. The gallery was packed, walls filled with the faces of people who had once been forgotten. My mom stopped at one painting, a woman holding a baby, face weary but proud, and whispered, "That looks like me when we came here." I smiled, because it was. I'd drawn her from an old photo years ago, but never told her. She wiped her eyes quietly, and in that small moment, everything between us, every argument, every misunderstanding, every silence, felt forgiven. After that night, my life moved fast, but I moved differently. I wasn't chasing anymore. I was creating with peace. I started collaborating with global brands, not as their Asian representation piece, but as their lead designer, someone who called the shots. When a major company approached me for a campaign about cultural identity, I made sure to hire artists from underrepresented backgrounds, the kind of people who reminded me of myself a few years back. Hungry, scared, brilliant. I started mentoring students too. The ones who DM me saying they wanted to pursue art, but their parents didn't believe in them. I tell them, don't chase validation, build something that makes it impossible for people to ignore you. Watching them grow was more fulfilling than any brand deal or viral post. I even created a scholarship fund for immigrant students who wanted to study art or design but couldn't afford tuition. The first recipient, a Korean-American sophomore named Jisoo, sent me a letter that said, "I thought dreams were only for other people until I saw you." I kept that letter pinned above my desk. Of course, success didn't mean everything was perfect. I still had nights where I stared at blank canvases, wondering if I'd already peaked, or mornings where imposter syndrome wrapped around me like fog. But instead of fighting it, I started letting it sit beside me. I'd make tea, open my sketchbook, and remind myself that doubt only meant I still cared. The world kept calling me an inspiration, but I knew the truth. I was just someone who refused to quit. When Time magazine reached out to feature me on their next 100 innovators list, I laughed so hard I cried. Me, the girl who once couldn't afford her bus fare, now being called an innovator. When the feature came out, my parents framed the article and hung it above their dry cleaning counter, right where customers could see it. My dad told me later in his gruff voice, "Somebody came in today and said, Your daughter changed how we see art. He looked down for a second before adding, I told them I was proud. I don't think I've ever hugged him tighter. A few months later, I was invited to paint a mural in Koreatown, a massive wall dedicated to immigrant resilience. It felt poetic, coming full circle to the neighborhood that raised me, the one I once felt trapped in. On the final day, as I stood back to look at the finished piece, a mosaic of faces, colors, and stories interwoven like a tapestry of every person who ever believed in me, I noticed a small crowd gathering. Kids from nearby schools, elderly shop owners, even my old cafe manager stood there smiling. My mom brought kimbap for everyone, and my dad handed out bottled water like it was a festival. When a reporter asked me what the mural meant, I said, it's proof that we were always here. We just needed to be seen. That night, back home, I sat by the window with a cup of green tea, scrolling through messages, interviews, and emails I didn't have time to read. But instead of checking my stats or followers like I used to, I closed my laptop and just watched the city lights flicker. Somewhere in the distance, I heard laughter, cars honking, life happening. And I thought about how far I'd come from that scared girl in the cafe, sketching strangers because she was too afraid to draw herself. I'd spent years thinking I needed to show everyone who I was, that success meant loud validation. But now I knew the real proof wasn't in the applause, the money, or the headlines. It was in the quiet mornings when I picked up a pencil and still felt wonder. It was in every person who saw my art and whispered, that's me. It was in learning that being seen wasn't the goal. Seeing myself was. So yeah, I came back to UCLA, to the same halls where I once walked invisible. I stood on that stage and spoke into a microphone that once felt too big for me. I saw my parents smiling in the front row, my professors nodding with pride, students recording my words like they mattered. And maybe they did. But more than that, I realized I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The world had finally caught up to the version of me I always believed in. And as I left the campus that night, moonlight spilling over the fountain where I once cried alone, I smiled because I finally understood I wasn't here to prove them wrong. I was here to prove myself right, and I did. And my ex tried to ruin my life, but karma had other plans. I never thought my life would turn into one of those messy Reddit stories where people comment, girl, you dodged a bullet. But here we are. My name's Emily Carter. I'm 27, and 3 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out, a good job, a loving boyfriend, a best friend I trusted with my life, and a career that finally seemed to be taking off in Austin, Texas. I worked at a creative marketing agency called Brightline, where I managed some of our biggest clients. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well, and I loved the chaos of deadlines, brainstorming sessions, and caffeine-fueled nights spent chasing perfection. My boyfriend Ryan worked there, too, a copywriter with an easy smile, a charming voice, and the kind of confidence that made people listen. When I met him, I thought he was funny, ambitious, attentive, the kind of guy who remembered how I liked my coffee and made me feel like I mattered. For 3 years, he was my safe place. We talked about moving in together, buying a dog, even maybe someday getting married. I didn't see the storm coming because I was too busy building a future with someone who was busy destroying me behind my back. Tara, my best friend since college, was part of that world too. We'd started at Brightline together, survived bad bosses and broken printers, cried over men and deadlines in the same breath. She knew every part of my life, my fears, my dreams, my love for Ryan. I trusted her completely. She used to call me her soul sister. Funny how those words sound like poison now. It started small, little things. I ignored Ryan getting distant, Tara being weirdly defensive when I asked about her weekend plans, the way conversations died when I walked into the break room. I brushed it off because that's what you do when you believe in people. I told myself Ryan was just stressed about work and Tara was tired. Love makes you stupid in the kindest, cruelest ways. Then came the big campaign, the one that would define my career. We had a massive tech client on board and I was leading the project. I poured everything into it, late nights, skipped weekends, every ounce of creativity I had. Ryan was on the team too, and he'd promised to help with copy and presentation. I remember thinking how lucky I was to work with both the man I loved and my best friend on something that could change our careers. The day before the pitch, Ryan was acting weirdly cold. I brushed his shoulder and asked, "You okay?" He said he was fine, but avoided eye contact. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my boss. "We need to talk now." When I got to the office, my boss, Mark, looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. He said the client's data had been leaked, confidential details that someone from our team had shared. I was stunned. "But how?" I asked. He looked at me like he didn't want to say it. "Emily, all the files were accessed from your account." My stomach dropped. "That's not possible," I said, my voice trembling. But it was. Ryan had access to my login. We worked together. I trusted him. They suspended me pending investigation, and before I could even explain, the rumor mill started spinning. People whispered that I'd sabotaged the project out of jealousy because Ryan had been promoted recently. The promotion I helped him get. The one I stayed up nights rewriting his proposals for. I walked out of that office in a fog, hearing laughter behind my back, seeing Tara avoid my eyes. That night, I went to Ryan's apartment to talk. His car was outside, lights on, I knocked, no answer, so I used the key he'd given me months ago, and that's when my world collapsed. Tara's laugh echoed from his bedroom. My heart stopped. I walked in and found them, my boyfriend, and my best friend tangled up in sheets I'd helped him pick. For a few seconds, I just stood there. Then Tara's eyes went wide and she jumped up, muttering something about it not being what it looked like. Ryan didn't even flinch. He just looked annoyed, like I'd interrupted his nap. "You shouldn't be here," he said coldly. My brain was screaming. This is not real. This is not happening. But it was. He blamed me, told me I'd been distant, too obsessed with work. Tara cried, saying she didn't mean for it to happen. I left without saying another word, shaking so hard I could barely drive. The next few days were a blur. HR called to say I was officially terminated breach of trust. They said. Ryan and Tara still worked there. They probably celebrated over wine and laughter while I sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by rejection emails and takeout boxes, wondering how I'd gone from confident to completely broken. My mom told me to come home for a bit, but I couldn't. I didn't want pity. I wanted answers, closure, maybe even revenge, but mostly I wanted to remember who I was before them. Nights were the hardest. I'd scroll through social media and see Ryan and Tara posting pictures together, captioned with things like, "Finally where we belong," or "Everything happens for a reason." The irony was so sharp it hurt. They were flaunting the life they stole from me. Every fiber of me wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all, to tell everyone what they'd done. But I didn't. I disappeared. For weeks, I barely left my apartment. Bills piled up, savings drained, friends stopped calling. The people who used to smile at me in the office avoided me now. But somewhere in that loneliness, something shifted. I realized no one was coming to save me. No one was going to clear my name or make things right. It had to be me. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done in years. Writing made me remember the old Emily, the one who'd built her career from scratch, who didn't need validation from anyone. I got up one morning, looked in the mirror at the hollow version of myself, and whispered, "You are not done yet." That became my mantra. I started applying for new jobs, though most didn't call back. The marketing world is small, and gossip spreads fast. Didn't she leak a client's data? Became my shadow. So I decided to stop chasing what was broken. I freelanced small gigs, local shops, social media campaigns for startups. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I poured myself into learning online courses, branding, digital strategy. Late nights turned into small victories, a client referral here, a growing reputation there. Slowly, life began to breathe again. One day, months later, I ran into an old coworker at a coffee shop. She told me Ryan and Tara weren't doing so great. Apparently, their big campaign flopped, and the client pulled out after rumors of internal leaks sound familiar. Karma was stretching her legs, and I wasn't even the one pushing. That night, I sat by my window, sipping cheap wine, and for the first time in months, I smiled. Not the brittle kind I'd forced before a real one. Because I realized something. I didn't need revenge. I just needed to rise. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't help Karma find her target a little faster. Ryan and Tara had taken my job, my peace, and my reputation, but what they didn't realize was that I was building something they couldn't touch, a version of me that no betrayal could break. And as I watched the lights of Austin shimmer in the distance, I made myself a promise. I would come back stronger. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. They thought they'd destroyed me, but all they'd done was light a fire they could never put out. The girl who once cried herself to sleep was gone. The woman rising in her place, she was about to show the world that karma might take her time, but she never misses. When I say I rebuilt my life from ashes, I mean it literally felt like sifting through the burnt remains of everything I once believed in and trying to find something that still worked. After Ryan and Tara's betrayal, I moved out of my apartment, sold half my furniture, and rented a small studio downtown. The kind of place that smelled like old wood and cheap coffee but gave me space to breathe. The first few months were messy. Healing isn't poetic. It's waking up at 3 a.m. with your heart racing, scrolling through old photos, and then deleting them only to regret it seconds later. But somewhere between the crying and the quiet, I started learning again, not just about marketing or business, but about myself. I realized I had built my whole identity around being liked, being helpful, being the person people could lean on. That version of me got crushed, but she also gave birth to someone new, someone who wasn't afraid to stand alone. I threw myself into learning digital marketing like it was my lifeline. I watched YouTube tutorials at 2 a.m., signed up for free courses, devoured every blog on branding, SEO, and business strategy I could find. My savings were nearly gone, but my drive was something else entirely. I started freelancing small projects for local cafes, boutiques, even a friend's Etsy shop. My first paycheck as a freelancer was only $150, but it felt like $1,000,000. I wasn't answering to anyone anymore. I was creating something that was mine. It wasn't easy though. There were nights I doubted everything, wondering if I'd ever have a real job again. But every little success fueled me. Then came Sophie. We met on a freelance forum where she posted something like, "Anyone else sick of corporate BS and ready to build an empire?" I replied, "Absolutely. Where do we start?" And that was it. She became one of my closest friends, bold, sarcastic, and brilliant. Sophie was everything I wasn't at that time, fearless and unapologetic. She taught me how to network, how to price my work properly, and more importantly, how to stop underselling myself. We started collaborating on small projects she did design. I handled branding and strategy. Soon, our combo started gaining attention. Word of mouth spread faster than I expected, and suddenly, small businesses were lining up for consultations. Around this time, I met David, a quiet, thoughtful tech entrepreneur who needed help branding his new startup. He reached out after seeing one of my social media posts about marketing psychology. I didn't know it then, but meeting him would change everything. David was the kind of client who actually listened, respected my ideas, and gave me space to shine. We started working together, and within months, his startup's social media presence exploded. He credited me publicly in interviews, saying I understood audiences better than anyone. That validation meant the world to me, not because I needed it, but because it reminded me that I was never the problem. While my life was taking shape again, Ryan and Tara's picture-perfect world on social media was growing louder. Fake smiles, couple vacations, hash power couple hashtags, all that nonsense. But social media is a highlight reel, and cracks were starting to show behind their filters. One of my old coworkers, Jenna, messaged me one day saying, "You won't believe this, but Ryan's been taking credit for Tara's campaigns, and she's losing her mind." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Apparently, their dream team dynamic was falling apart fast. Clients weren't happy, internal gossip was growing, and Tara's reputation was crumbling, just like she helped mine. Karma had clocked in. I didn't gloat, but I did feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. I had been there, once trusting them, defending them, and losing everything because of it. Seeing them unravel without me lifting a finger felt like poetic justice. By that time, my freelance work had evolved into something bigger, a small consultancy I named Reignite Marketing. The name came to me one night while journaling, and it represented everything I felt, a rebirth from fire. I built a minimalist website, shared success stories from clients, and even created online workshops teaching small businesses how to brand themselves authentically. Slowly, my name started spreading beyond Austin. One day, I got an email that made my heart skip. It was from a major brand that used to work with Brightline, my old company. They had heard about my results through a client referral and wanted to discuss working together. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes, half expecting it to be a prank. But it was real. The meeting was set for Friday, and when I walked into that conference room confident, poised, and no longer the timid employee who used to beg for approval, I felt something powerful. This time, I wasn't representing anyone else's company. I was representing me. The pitch went incredibly well. I talked strategy, creativity, and data-driven branding like I'd been born for it. When the client's CEO said, "We'd like to work with you," I nearly cried right there, but I held it in, smiled, and said I'd be honored. 2 weeks later, Reignite Marketing officially landed its biggest client, the same one Brightline had lost because of internal issues. The irony was delicious. The campaign took off like wildfire. Within a month, our results were trending online. People were praising the fresh, authentic approach, and my small company was suddenly the talk of the town. Articles were written about the new wave of independent marketers redefining brand success, and my name was right there. Ryan's company tried to spin it, posting subtle jabs about creative theft and unethical competition, but no one bought it. I didn't respond. Publicly, silence was my loudest statement. The universe was doing the talking for me. One afternoon, Sophie called, laughing hysterically. "You'll never believe this," she said. "Ryan's team just pitched one of your strategies to a client word for word." I nearly spit out my drink. "And?" I asked. "The client told them they'd already seen it, because you did it first." I couldn't stop smiling for the rest of the day. Karma wasn't just knocking, she was waltzing in, heels first. As months passed, my consultancy grew. I hired 2 part-time assistants, started mentoring other freelancers, and even spoke at a local entrepreneurship event where I shared my story, not the betrayal part, but the rebirth. David was there, sitting in the front row, clapping the loudest. He'd become a good friend, sometimes more than that, though neither of us rushed anything. He once told me, "You don't owe your past an explanation. You owe your future a chance." That stuck with me. Meanwhile, Brightline was sinking fast. Clients were leaving, staff turnover was high, and their reputation was sliding. Ryan had reportedly gotten into an argument with upper management after a failed campaign and was demoted. Tara, bitter and desperate, started bad-mouthing him to coworkers the same way she once did to me. The cycle had come full circle, and I didn't even have to move a finger. I was busy living, growing, succeeding. Everything they tried to take from me was returning tenfold. The moment I knew Karma had truly finished her work came one morning when I got an email from Brightline's HR team. They wanted to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. I laughed so hard I scared my dog. They didn't even realize who owned Reignite Marketing. I didn't reply. Instead, I took a deep breath and looked around, my small but beautiful office sunlight spilling across my desk, my team chatting in the next room, a framed quote on the wall that read, "She believed she could, so she did." I thought about the girl I used to be crying on her apartment floor, broken and humiliated. And I wish I could tell her this moment was coming, that the pain wouldn't last forever, that the people who hurt her would eventually face their own mess, and most importantly, that she'd rise from it, not bitter, but better. By the time that thought sank in, I realized I didn't even hate Ryan or Tara anymore. They weren't villains in my story, they were just bad chapters. And the book I was writing now, it was filled with victory, peace, and power. So I stopped looking back. Because once you've learned how to rise, you stop wasting time, wondering why you ever fell. I didn't need revenge, I'd already won. And karma, she was right on schedule. If someone told me 3 years ago that the same people who tried to destroy me would end up being the architects of their own downfall, I would have laughed and said life doesn't work that poetically, but turns out sometimes karma writes better stories than I ever could. By the time Ragnite Marketing had become a full-fledged agency with a small team, loyal clients, and an actual office space that didn't smell like instant noodles, I was living a life that once felt impossible. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of possibility, new projects, new collaborations, new hope. I'd gone from barely surviving to thriving. My calendar was booked months ahead. My business was profitable, and for the first time in years, I felt safe. But the world has a funny way of keeping you updated about the people you've outgrown. I didn't look for news about Ryan or Tara. I didn't need to because people loved sending me updates like they were episode recaps of a reality show I'd once starred in. Did you hear about Brightline losing the Delta Tech account? Jenna texted one day, followed by, guess who they lost it to? I didn't even have to guess. That was one of the biggest contracts in our region, and when Reignite won it fair and square, I couldn't help but smile. Not a spiteful smile, more like the kind you get when the universe finally balances its scales. Apparently, the loss sent shockwaves through Brightline. Ryan had been in charge of the pitch, but his presentation was a disaster. He'd shown up unprepared, arrogant, and overly confident that his charm would win the room like it always had. But the industry had changed. People wanted authenticity now, not smooth talk. And authenticity was my specialty. After that, things started spiraling fast for him. Clients left, projects flopped, and whispers about his unprofessional behavior began spreading. From what I heard, he started coming into work late, missing deadlines, and picking fights with Tara, who had become increasingly bitter and insecure as her influence faded. They'd once been the golden couple of Brightline, but cracks had turned into canyons. Ryan's ego couldn't handle failure, and Tara couldn't handle being overshadowed. People said the fights were loud enough to be heard across the office. Eventually, the inevitable happened. Ryan started drinking. Not just socially, but dangerously. He'd show up hungover, make careless mistakes, and blame everyone else for them. I remember sitting in my office one Friday evening, sipping tea, as Sophie laughed across the desk, reading a gossip thread about a certain marketing duo who'd become the company's cautionary tale. It was surreal watching karma unfold without me having to lift a single finger. Months passed, and their implosion became public. Tara left Ryan after finding out he'd flirted with a potential client during a meeting, a client she was personally managing. The rumor was that she ended things dramatically, storming out of a company dinner, leaving Ryan sitting there, speechless, while their coworkers awkwardly pretended not to stare. She quickly rebounded with that same client because of course she did and plastered her new relationship all over social media, complete with inspirational captions about self-love and new beginnings. But even that didn't last long. Her new guy ghosted her after a few months and she went radio silent online after that. The queen of curated perfection had vanished into digital dust. As for Ryan, his downfall only accelerated. He'd burned too many bridges and lost too many clients. Eventually, Brightline had no choice but to let him go. The man who once laughed at me for losing my job was now walking the same road. Only this time, there was no one to hold his hand. When I heard he'd been fired, I didn't feel joy. I felt something deeper closure. I'd spent so long trying to understand why he did what he did. But now I realize it didn't matter. He destroyed himself the same way he destroyed me with arrogance, lies, and greed. And karma had simply mirrored it back to him. A few months later, I got an invitation that would turn this poetic cycle into something almost cinematic. It was for a major marketing conference in Dallas, the biggest one in the state. They wanted me to be a keynote speaker to share my entrepreneurial journey from setback to success. I accepted, partly because it was an incredible opportunity and partly because it felt like the final page of a chapter I'd been waiting to close. The event was held at a massive convention center, filled with industry leaders, creators, and companies I'd once dreamed of working for. When I walked onto that stage, mic clipped to my blazer, lights warm on my face, and applause echoing around me, I felt this surge of power, not the dominating kind, but the quiet, grounded kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are. I talked about resilience, authenticity, and the power of rebuilding yourself after being broken. I didn't name names, but when I said, sometimes the people who break you are just stepping stones to your purpose, I saw a few knowing smiles in the audience. After my talk, I stepped off stage to a line of people wanting to shake my hand, ask questions, take photos. That's when I saw him, Ryan. standing near the back, wearing a wrinkled suit, holding a cheap cup of conference coffee like it was the only thing holding him together. For a moment, my chest tightened, not out of love, but memory. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. The confident smirk he once wore had been replaced by exhaustion. He waited until the crowd thinned before approaching me. "Emily," he said softly, as if the name tasted strange now. I turned, meeting his eyes calmly. "Ryan." He gave a nervous laugh. "Wow, you look different, successful." I didn't respond to that. He hesitated before blurting, "Listen, I know you probably hate me, but I was wondering if maybe you could help me out. I'm trying to get back on my feet. I've been applying for jobs, but the industry's brutal right now. Maybe you could..." He didn't finish. I knew what he wanted, a recommendation. Maybe even a job. A part of me, the old me, would have tried to save him because that's who I was once. But that girl was gone. I looked at him and said, gently but firmly, "Ryan, I hope you find what you're looking for, but I built my company on integrity and I can't attach my name to yours. You understand?" His face fell, and for a second I thought he might lash out, but instead he just nodded, defeated. "Yeah," he murmured. "I get it." He walked away slowly, shoulders hunched, disappearing into the crowd. I watched him go, not with anger, not even with pity, but with peace, because I finally understood that his downfall was never my responsibility. My revenge had already happened the moment I chose myself. Later that evening, a journalist covering the event interviewed me, asking how it felt to be one of the fastest rising women in the industry after starting from scratch. I smiled and said, "Honestly, it feels like karma has great timing." The article went viral that week, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the backstory. Old coworkers reached out, saying things like, "You're such an inspiration," or "Wow, you really came full circle." I didn't reply to most of them because I didn't need their validation anymore. My success wasn't built to prove anything to anyone. It was built from pain, perseverance, and purpose. A few months later, Sophie and I expanded the company. We partnered with David's tech firm to launch a new platform connecting small businesses with marketing freelancers, a full circle way to give back to the community that had helped me rise. Life was calm, grounded, and full. One evening, I got an email from an unknown address. It was from Tara. All it said was, "I'm sorry for everything. You didn't deserve what we did to you. I hope you're happy now." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to. Some stories don't need closure. They just need to end, and mine already had. The final time I saw Ryan was purely by coincidence. I was grabbing coffee at a small shop downtown when he walked in, looking completely different, tired, disheveled, older than his years. He didn't see me, and I didn't say anything. He ordered black coffee, sat by the window, and stared out like someone who was still waiting for life to restart. I finished my drink and left quietly, feeling not bitterness, but gratitude that I had walked away when I did, that I had survived, that I had grown. As I stepped into the sunlight, I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the long nights, the rise, the reckoning, and I realized something beautiful. Sometimes karma doesn't come as thunder or fire. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, patient. It waits until you're strong enough to see it unfold. That night, I sat down to write this Reddit post, not out of spite, but to remind anyone reading that pain doesn't define you. It refines you. The people who wronged you will face their lessons in their own time. You don't have to play judge or executioner. Your only job is to rise. Because when you do, karma doesn't miss, it simply arrives right on schedule. And as I close this chapter of my life, I'll leave you with the words that carried me through the darkest days. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about rising so high they can't reach you anymore. Karma doesn't always come fast, but it never misses. The end. I was kicked out for my sister's false accusation. Now, they want to be included in my wedding. I still remember the night my entire world collapsed like it happened yesterday, even though it's been 6 years since that moment when I realized blood isn't always family, and sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most will burn you alive, just to keep their own hands warm. And that thought still hits me whenever I hear the sound of a slammed door, because that's the sound that ended my childhood and forced me to become someone I never thought I'd be. I was 21 then, still living in my parents' house in a quiet little suburb in Illinois, juggling my part-time job at the campus bookstore and trying to keep my GPA high enough to hold on to my scholarship. Because that scholarship was my ticket out of a life that had always revolved around keeping my parents and my younger sister, Sophie, happy. Sophie was the golden child. Always had been. She could crash her car into the neighbor's mailbox, and somehow my mom would blame the mailbox for being in her way. I used to think she was just immature, spoiled, maybe even a little lost. But the night she destroyed my life, I saw what she really was. Someone who would rather see me ruined than admit she made a mistake. It started on a Friday evening in late April, a normal night that turned into something out of a nightmare. I was in my room working on my final paper when my mom shouted from downstairs, her voice already sharp in that way that meant trouble. "Emily, get down here right now." I remember the dread in my stomach as I closed my laptop and walked down the hall, seeing Sophie sitting on the couch with this fake innocent look and tears just starting to pool in her eyes, the kind she could turn on like a faucet whenever she wanted attention. On the coffee table lay a ripped envelope with my university's logo on it, and before I could even say a word, my mom snatched it up and waved it in my face. "What is this, Emily? Did you really think we wouldn't find out?" I was confused, completely blindsided, and I stammered something like, "What are you talking about?" But then Sophie jumped in, clutching her phone like she was holding evidence of a crime. "Mom, she's lying. She's been sneaking into my room and taking my mail. That's a letter from the scholarship office. She changed my application details online so I wouldn't get approved. I saw the email on her laptop." I froze. I didn't even understand what she was accusing me of. The scholarship she was talking about was a small local one she'd applied for, totally separate from mine, and I had zero reason to mess with it. But my mom's face was already twisting with that mix of fury and disappointment I knew too well. "You sabotaged your sister after everything we've done for you?" she snapped, and I could feel my pulse hammering in my neck. "Mom, I didn't. Why would I even—" "Sophie, that's not true." I turned to her, hoping she'd laugh and say it was a joke gone too far, but instead she started crying harder, shaking her head. "You always hated that I got into better programs. You always said I didn't deserve anything handed to me. You even told Grace you were going to teach me a lesson." Grace was my best friend, and I hadn't seen her in days, so the fact that Sophie was dragging her into this made my brain short circuit. My dad came in from the kitchen, already irritated from whatever nonsense he'd been watching on TV, and demanded to know what was going on. Mom filled him in, dramatizing every word until it sounded like I'd hacked the Pentagon. I tried to explain, but no one was listening. Dad just muttered, "Jesus, Emily, this is low," and rubbed his temples like I was a burden rather than his daughter. Sophie even pulled up some fake screenshots on her phone, probably doctored emails showing my name on a change application. I remember grabbing the phone, my hands shaking, trying to scroll through them, insisting they were fake. But my mom snatched it back and yelled at me to stop lying. Then she said something that still echoes in my head. "You're jealous, Emily. You've always been jealous of your sister. You can't stand seeing her succeed, so you destroy everything." I could feel the tears burning behind my eyes, but more than that, I felt something cracking inside me. Something that whispered, this might be the moment my family stops being my family. I tried one last time to reason with them, but my words just bounced off the wall of their certainty. "Mom, please, I would never do that. I've been studying all week. You can ask my professors, check my emails." But she cut me off with a slap so hard it stunned me into silence. I remember the sound more than the pain, the sharp snap of skin on skin, and the way Sophie gasped, pretending to be shocked while secretly enjoying it. My mom stood there, breathing heavily, eyes full of disgust. Get out of this house before I do something I regret." My dad didn't stop her. He didn't even look at me. He just folded his arms and said, "Maybe it's for the best. You've brought nothing but drama lately." My brain couldn't process it. I felt like I was watching a movie where I was the villain and everyone else had already seen the ending. "You're really kicking me out over a lie?" I whispered, and my mom just pointed to the door. "You made your choice, Emily. Now live with it." Sophie sat there pretending to cry, whispering, "I'm sorry, Em, but you brought this on yourself." And that broke me more than the slap. I ran upstairs, heart pounding, grabbed my old duffel bag, stuffed in a few clothes, my toothbrush, my laptop, and my wallet. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my phone twice. I remember pausing by the mirror in my room, staring at my red cheek and my tear-streaked face and thinking, this can't be happening. They'll come upstairs any second and say they made a mistake. But no one came. The house was silent except for Sophie's muffled sobs downstairs, which I knew were fake. When I came back down, my mom was standing by the front door, arms crossed, eyes cold. She held out $40 in cash and said flatly, "You'll need this more than we do." I couldn't even speak. I just walked out, the night air biting against my skin, my heart feeling like it had been ripped out. I sat on the curb with my bag beside me and cried until my throat hurt, until my tears dried and my mind went numb. That's when it hit me. I had nowhere to go. I tried calling Grace, but my phone battery was almost dead and she didn't answer right away. So I walked. I walked for hours, past dark houses, past the park where Sophie and I used to play, past everything that used to feel safe. At one point, I stopped under a streetlight and realized my entire life fit into one cheap duffel bag. I ended up at an all-night diner, ordered a cup of coffee I couldn't afford, and just sat there staring at the steam, trying to figure out what I'd done to deserve this. Around 2 a.m., Grace finally called back, half asleep but instantly alert when she heard me crying. "Em, where are you? What happened?" she asked, and I broke down again, telling her everything. She cursed under her breath and said, "You're not staying out there. I'm coming to get you." 20 minutes later, she pulled up in her beat-up Honda, wearing pajama pants and a hoodie, and when she saw my face, she didn't say a word. She just hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. That hug was the first real warmth I felt that night. She took me back to her apartment, gave me her couch, and made me tea even though it was 3 a.m. When I finally stopped crying, I asked, "Grace, what if they're right? What if I really am the problem?" And she looked me dead in the eye and said, "No, Em. They've been gaslighting you your whole life. This was just their excuse to push you out because you stopped letting them control you." I didn't want to believe it then, but deep down I knew she was right. My family had always needed someone to blame whenever things went wrong, and I'd always been the easiest target because I cared too much. That night, I promised myself I wouldn't go crawling back, no matter how much it hurt. The next few days were a blur. My mom sent a text saying I could come get whatever junk I left behind, but that I was no longer welcome in the house. Sophie posted some vague status online about cutting out toxic people and got 100 sympathetic comments. I saw it and wanted to scream. I even got a message from one of her friends saying, "Wow, didn't know you were capable of something like that." And that's when I deleted all my social media. I couldn't handle seeing how easily my own sister had painted me as a villain. Grace helped me find a part-time job at a local coffee shop to cover rent, and every day I woke up with this dull ache in my chest, wondering how my parents could sleep at night knowing their daughter was out there alone. For weeks, I'd check my phone, hoping for an apology, a text, anything, but nothing came. It was like I'd been erased from their family album, and still, I couldn't bring myself to hate them. I just kept thinking if I worked hard enough, if I proved I wasn't the person they said I was, maybe someday they'd see the truth. But as time passed, that hope started to fade, replaced by something else, a quiet burning determination. I realized they hadn't just kicked me out of the house. They'd freed me from the cage they'd built around me. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to play the role of the responsible daughter cleaning up Sophie's messes. I was terrified, broke, and heartbroken, but I was also finally free. That night, lying on Grace's couch with a blanket that smelled like laundry detergent and a cup of cold tea beside me, I whispered to myself, "You're going to survive this." And I did. I got up the next morning, went to work, smiled at customers, even though my eyes were puffy from crying, and started building a life from the ground up. But deep down, no matter how much time passed, the memory of that night, the slap, the lies, the door slamming, stayed with me. It became the scar I carried everywhere, the proof that sometimes the people who swear they love you most will be the first to throw you to the wolves. And even though I didn't know it then, that night wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of the version of me who would one day stand tall enough that the people who kicked her out would have to look up just to see her. When you lose everything, all at once, it's strange how quiet the world feels. Like the universe pauses just long enough for you to hear your own heart shattering. And that's what it felt like for me, the weeks after my family kicked me out, when every sound, the slam of a car door, the buzz of a phone, made me flinch because I half expected it to be someone coming to tell me it was all a misunderstanding, that they wanted me back, but no one ever did. And I realized pretty quickly that life doesn't stop to let you grieve. It just keeps moving whether you're ready or not. The first few months were hell. There's really no nice way to say it. Grace's couch became my home, that tiny one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a perpetually leaking sink. I'd wake up every morning to the sound of her cat, Mochi, meowing for food and the smell of cheap coffee brewing, and somehow that chaos became my comfort. Grace was everything I wasn't. Loud, sarcastic, unapologetic, and she didn't treat me like some fragile, broken thing. She'd tease me about my serious face, shove a cup of coffee in my hand, and say things like, "Come on, Em, the world's still spinning. Let's go make rent money." She worked at a coffee shop called Bean Scene, this quirky hole in the wall near the university campus, where art kids, night owls, and professors all seemed to collide. When she got me a part-time job there, I thought I'd last maybe a week because I'd never worked in food service before, but somehow I stuck it out. I burned my hand on the espresso machine twice the first day, forgot someone's order, and accidentally called a customer mom. But Grace just laughed so hard she nearly choked on a muffin and told me I fit right in. The pay was crap, but every dollar felt like proof that I could survive without my family, and that was something. Nights were the hardest though. After closing the shop, we'd walk back to her apartment under flickering streetlights, and I'd lie awake on the couch staring at the ceiling, replaying every word my mom had said that night. The slap, the way my dad didn't even look at me, the smug little smirk Sophie wore as she watched me pack. Some nights I cried silently, pressing my face into the pillow so Grace wouldn't hear, but other nights I'd get angry, really angry, for the first time in my life. Angry that I'd spent 21 years being the good daughter only to be tossed out like trash. That anger became fuel. I picked up another job cleaning offices at night. I'd scrub floors while listening to podcasts about women who built their own businesses from nothing. And even though I was exhausted and constantly running on caffeine, something inside me started to shift. I was learning how to rely on myself, how to pay bills, how to stretch $20 to last a week, and weirdly, that struggle started to make me feel strong. Grace noticed it too. One night, while we were eating dollar store ramen and watching old rom-coms on her laptop, she looked at me and said, "You know, Em, you're kind of a badass." I laughed, almost choking on a noodle, but she wasn't joking. "No, I'm serious. You went from being kicked out to working 2 jobs and still managing to smile at customers who don't even tip. That's not weakness, that's power." That stuck with me. For the first time, I started to believe I could be something more than just the family scapegoat. A few months later, something unexpected happened that changed everything. One of the regular customers at the coffee shop, a woman named Linda, mid-40s, always dressed like she walked out of a lifestyle magazine, was hosting a small fundraiser and overheard me telling Grace about how I used to help organize school events. She asked if I'd be interested in helping her plan the decorations and schedule for her event. I said yes instantly, though I had no idea what I was doing professionally. That weekend, I helped her set up tables, arrange flowers, coordinate catering deliveries, even handle last minute chaos when the DJ's car broke down. Somehow, it all went perfectly. People complimented her nonstop, and she told everyone, "It's all thanks to Emily, my miracle worker." That night, for the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely proud of myself. It was like I'd rediscovered a part of me I thought was gone. The girl who loved bringing people together, organizing things, creating beauty out of chaos. After the event, Linda handed me an envelope with $150 in cash and said, "You're talented, Emily. You should think about doing this professionally." That sentence lit something in my chest that I didn't even realize was still capable of burning. Over the next few weeks, I started saying yes to every little opportunity. Birthday parties, baby showers, office events. I'd spend nights sketching table layouts in a notebook and watch YouTube tutorials about floral arrangements. Grace became my cheerleader, hyping me up like she was my PR agent. She even made me a cheap little business card on her printer that said, "Emily Carter Events Decor." It looked amateur, but to me, it was everything. Life was still messy. I was still broke, still healing, but I had direction now. I was rebuilding, one small gig at a time. But healing wasn't linear. Some days I'd be fine, smiling at customers, feeling unstoppable, and then something random, a song on the radio, a mother hugging her daughter in line, would hit me like a punch, and suddenly I'd be back in that living room hearing my mom's voice telling me to get out. I'd excuse myself to the back room, take a deep breath, and remind myself that those people no longer had power over me. Grace taught me this thing she called micro celebrations, where every small win deserved acknowledgement. Got a new client? We'd split a cupcake. Paid rent early? Movie night with popcorn. Didn't cry once all week? 2 cupcakes. It sounds silly, but those tiny celebrations became milestones in my healing. They reminded me that happiness wasn't this huge destination. It was made of little moments I could actually control. And slowly, the pain started to fade. I remember one morning, maybe 6 months after I'd left home, standing in the middle of the coffee shop before opening. The early sunlight was streaming through the windows, painting the tables gold, and I realized I felt calm. Not happy exactly, but peaceful, which for me was new. Grace walked in, yawning, her hair a total mess, and said, "You're smiling like a weirdo. What's up?" I told her, "I think I'm finally okay," and she raised her coffee cup like a toast. "Took you long enough." That day, we got slammed with customers, one of whom was a wedding planner named Teresa who was setting up an engagement party nearby. She noticed how I handled a rude customer with a smile and later came up to the counter to compliment me. We started talking, and when she found out I did small event setups, she asked if I wanted to assist her with a wedding the following weekend. I said yes without hesitation, even though my stomach was twisting with nerves. The wedding was at this gorgeous vineyard about an hour outside the city, and it was chaos from the moment we got there. Flowers late, caterers lost, the bride crying over her hair, but for the first time in my life, chaos didn't scare me. It thrilled me. I moved through it like I belonged there, fixing problems before people even noticed them, keeping the bride calm, setting up last-minute seating changes. At one point, Teresa looked at me and said, "You're a natural, Emily. You've got the mind of a planner." By the end of that day, I was sweaty, exhausted, and covered in glitter, but I felt like I'd found my calling. I remember sitting in the car afterward, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror and thinking, this is who I was meant to be. Not the scared girl begging for approval, not the family disappointment, just me, strong, capable, building something real. A week later, Teresa called me again, offering me a paid assistant position for future weddings. It wasn't glamorous. It meant long hours, heavy lifting, and dealing with stressed out brides. But it was a step towards something that felt like a real future. Grace celebrated by making pancakes for dinner, burning half of them, and saying, "See? Told you the world doesn't end just because your family sucks." I laughed until I cried that night, realizing how far I'd come. I still miss my family sometimes. That ache never completely disappeared, but now it didn't control me. I no longer checked my phone hoping for an apology. I no longer replayed that night in my head over and over. Instead, I focused on creating something better for myself. And as I started working more weddings, learning the business, making contacts, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that maybe I could build a life so full, so beautiful, that the people who threw me away would one day realize what they lost. But that wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could rise. My first big moment came one sunny afternoon when Teresa got food poisoning 2 hours before an engagement party for one of her high-profile clients. She called me in a panic and said, "Emily, I can't make it. You'll have to handle this one on your own." My heart dropped to my knees, but I heard myself say, "I've got it covered." I raced to the venue, triple-checked everything, fixed a torn banner with duct tape, and somehow turned a near disaster into a flawless event. When the couple thanked me at the end of the night, I almost cried. I walked home with tired feet and a heart that felt like it could burst. That night, Grace was waiting with a bottle of cheap wine and 2 mismatched glasses. She grinned and said, "To Emily, the comeback queen, We clinked glasses, and I laughed so hard I almost spilled mine. It hit me then. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. I'd gone from a girl crying on a diner curb with $40 and a duffel bag to someone people trusted to create their happiest days. That was my proof that I was rising again, piece by piece from the ruins they left me in. And though I didn't know it yet, that strength, that resilience would be exactly what I need when the past decided to come knocking again. By the time I turned 26, I had gotten so used to being in control that I barely remembered what it felt like to be thrown off balance until the day I met Liam. My business had finally taken off after years of struggle, long nights, and countless breakdowns behind a laptop screen that had seen me through more tears than Netflix marathons. Bloom Grace Events wasn't just a name anymore. It was my identity, my survival story turned success story. Grace and I had started it out of our tiny 2-bedroom apartment, using her old printer and my shaky savings account. Now, we had an office, a small team, and clients who actually paid deposits on time. We were running a full wedding event that weekend at a rustic vineyard just outside of Portland, and I was running on caffeine, anxiety, and the leftover adrenaline from back-to-back bridal meltdowns. It was one of those rare sunny days in Oregon where the sky looked almost too blue and the air buzzed with that kind of hopeful energy people get before saying I do. I remember standing near the reception setup, clipboard in hand, barking instructions into my earpiece like a war commander when I realized the florist had forgotten the arch arrangement. My heart sank. The bride was already in makeup, the guests would be arriving in an hour, and I could practically hear Grace's voice in my head saying, "Babe, breathe. It's just flowers, not the apocalypse." But to me, it was the apocalypse. I was about to sprint to my car and drive 30 minutes to grab replacement blooms myself when someone behind me said, "You look like you're about to murder a hydrangea." I spun around and saw him. Tall, broad shoulders, soft eyes behind black-rimmed glasses, and a smile that somehow disarmed my panic in less than 3 seconds. He was holding 2 iced coffees. "You look like you could use one," he said, holding one out like an offering. Normally, I'd have brushed it off with a polite, "I don't take drinks from strangers" kind of line. But in that moment, I was too tired to care and too intrigued not to. "You read minds now?" I asked, taking the cup anyway. "Only stressed ones," he said, then added, "I'm Liam, by the way, architect for the new Vineyard Pavilion." Oh, that Liam. The owner had mentioned him once or twice, said he was redesigning parts of the venue. We chatted briefly while I directed the crew, and somehow in between him helping me rewire a string of fairy lights and fixing a broken table leg with his toolkit, I realized he'd managed to do what very few people ever had. He calmed me down. That wedding went off without another hitch, and at the end of the night, when everyone was dancing under the fairy lights, we'd both struggled to hang. He found me standing off to the side with a glass of champagne. "You survived," he said. "Barely," I replied, laughing. He smiled, and then he said something I'd never forget. "You don't just survive, Emily. You build things from the rubble." That line, it hit harder than he could have known. I hadn't told him a thing about my past, about the night I was thrown out with nothing but $40 and a bag, about the endless nights I'd spent feeling worthless and unwanted. But somehow, he saw through the armor. We didn't exchange numbers that night. He just walked me to my car, told me he hoped we'd cross paths again, and left it at that. But the universe apparently had plans. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a new client who wanted help designing a small wedding reception at an urban rooftop in downtown Portland. When I showed up for the site meeting, guess who was there with the blueprints? Yep, Liam. He grinned when he saw me and said, "Guess fate's got a sense of humor." Over the next few months, our paths kept colliding through mutual clients, industry events, or just random coffee shop sightings. Grace teased me constantly, calling him Mr. Iced Coffee Destiny, but I tried not to read too much into it. I wasn't ready to fall for anyone. I'd built walls so high that even sunlight struggled to reach my heart. But Liam, he wasn't the kind of man who climbed walls. He was the kind who patiently built doors. He'd show up to my events just to help carry boxes. He'd bring me coffee when he knew I'd skipped lunch. He'd listen, really listen, when I ranted about vendors or cried about the stress of running a business. And he never once made me feel small for my emotions. It was weird at first. I wasn't used to being treated gently without an agenda. One night, after a long day, we ended up sitting on the rooftop of his building, watching the city lights blink below us. "You ever think about how far you've come?" he asked. I shrugged, staring at the skyline. "Sometimes, but mostly I just think about how much further I have to go." He looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, "You don't have to keep proving you deserve to stay." That was the first time anyone had said something like that to me. It cracked something inside. I told him about my family that night, about Sophie, about the lie that ruined me, about how my parents kicked me out without a second thought. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer pity or advice. He just reached over and took my hand. "You didn't deserve any of that," he said, his voice steady but filled with something fierce. "And you don't have to keep punishing yourself for surviving it." I didn't realize I was crying until he brushed away a tear with his thumb. That was the night I realized love didn't have to hurt to be real. From then on, things between us grew slowly but deeply. He never rushed me, never pressured. He learned the small things that made me feel safe. How I flinched at raised voices, how I needed space during stress, How I found peace in small routines like late night baking or reordering my spice rack when life felt chaotic. He'd tease me about my perfectionism, but always with warmth. Sometimes he'd just sit quietly nearby while I worked, sketching designs in his notebook while I arranged floral palettes. It was easy, comforting, grounding, like exhaling after years of holding my breath. Grace adored him too, though she loved to joke that he looked like a walking rom-com protagonist. I'd roll my eyes, but honestly, she wasn't wrong. Our first official date wasn't fancy, it was spontaneous. He texted me on a Saturday morning. "You free? There's a farmer's market with your name on it." We spent the day wandering through stalls, tasting local honey, trying weird jams, and sharing one of those massive cinnamon rolls that leaves your hands sticky and your soul happy. He made me laugh so hard that my cheeks hurt, and somewhere between the second cup of cider and the awkwardly adorable attempt to win me a plant at a pop-up booth, I realized I was falling for him. Not in the dramatic movie way, but in the quiet, grounding way that made everything else in my life make more sense. Weeks turned into months. My business thrived like never before. Maybe because I finally had emotional balance, or maybe because, for once, I wasn't doing everything alone. Liam started helping with logistics and venue layouts, and soon, clients began requesting our duo. People loved our synergy. Grace jokingly called us the Pinterest couple, which made both of us groan but secretly blush. One night, after we wrapped a particularly chaotic outdoor wedding, it started pouring rain. The guests had all left, the crew was gone, and it was just us, drenched and laughing as we tried to load the last of the equipment. I slipped on the wet grass, and he caught me, holding me close while rain dripped down our faces. I looked up at him, heart pounding, and before I could even process it, he kissed me. It wasn't planned or perfect. It was messy, soaked, and absolutely unforgettable. That kiss was everything I never knew I needed. It felt like all the pain of my past, the rejection, the loneliness, the nights of doubt were finally dissolving. After that night, there was no pretending. We were together and it just fit. He met Grace officially the following week and she gave him her classic protective friend speech. "Hurt her and I'll key your car." He just laughed and said, "I'll deserve it if I do." For the first time since my life had fallen apart, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. I had a thriving business, a best friend who was basically my sister, and a man who made me feel like I finally belonged somewhere. Liam never once made me feel like my past defined me. When I got anxious about family stuff or panicked about success, he'd remind me, "You built all this from nothing. You're allowed to be proud." I started to believe it. One evening, while working on a new event layout, he looked up from his sketches and said, "You ever think about designing your own wedding?" I froze, half smiling. "That's ironic. Coming from you," I said. He chuckled. "Just saying, you'd make it beautiful." I shrugged it off, but deep down, something warm fluttered in my chest. It was the first time the thought didn't terrify me. For years, the idea of marriage felt like a distant dream meant for other people. People who had stable families and love that didn't collapse under lies. But with him, it felt possible. Looking back, I think meeting Liam was the universe's way of proving that love isn't always found where you expect it. It's found in the quiet gestures, the steady presence, the person who brings you coffee when your world's on fire and stays to help you rebuild it. He wasn't my savior. He was my equal, my partner, my calm after years of chaos. And even though I didn't know it yet, the life we were building together was about to face the ultimate test. The ghosts of my past were still out there, waiting for their chance to crawl back in. But for now, all I knew was this. Love had finally found me, and for once, I wasn't running from it. When I got the text, I almost dropped my phone. It was a random Tuesday morning, sunlight pouring through the kitchen window, coffee brewing, my laptop open with half-written notes about floral layouts for a June wedding. And then, like a ghost reaching out from a grave I thought I'd sealed years ago, my mother's name flashed across the screen. Mom. Just that one word. Like a tiny crack in the armor I'd spent years building. For a second, I thought it was some kind of prank. She hadn't texted me in 6 years. Not on my birthdays. Not when I won my first business award. Not even when a mutual family friend had tagged me on Facebook saying how proud she was of me. 6 years of silence, and suddenly, "We heard you're getting married. We'd love to be there." My stomach twisted. It felt like someone had taken a warm knife and slowly turned it inside me. I just stared at the message, my brain trying to process the absurdity of those words. "We'd love to be there." Like they hadn't thrown me out on the street with $40 in a bag. Like they hadn't chosen Sophie's lie over my truth. Like I hadn't spent years teaching myself not to crave their love. Liam was in the next room, humming off key while making pancakes, and for a moment I just sat there in silence, listening to him. His voice grounded me. He had this ability to make even the worst moments feel manageable, like the world couldn't collapse completely as long as he was near. Still, my hands were shaking when I walked in, holding the phone like it was radioactive. "Hey," I said softly. He turned around, spatula in hand, smiling until he saw my face. "What's wrong?" I handed him the phone. He read the text, sighed, and set it down on the counter. "Damn," he muttered. "They finally crawled out of their cave." I tried to laugh, but it came out choked. "What do I even say to that?" I asked. "Do I say anything?" He gave me that thoughtful look he always had before speaking. "That depends," he said slowly. "What do you want to say?" That was the problem. I didn't know. Every emotion I'd buried, anger, hurt, longing, bitterness, they all came rushing back like a flood I couldn't contain. For years, I'd imagined what I'd do if they ever reached out. Sometimes I thought I'd yell. Sometimes I thought I'd ignore them. Sometimes I imagined sending them a photo of me and Grace clinking glasses under a family isn't blood sign. But now that it was real, I just felt hollow. After Liam left for work, I called Grace. The moment I said my mom texted me, she went silent for a full beat, then let out a dramatic, "Oh, hell no. What do they want now?" I read the message to her and she practically growled. "They heard? From who? The same gossip pipeline that probably said you joined a cult because you moved out of town?" Her anger made me laugh, which helped because otherwise I probably would have cried. Grace had been my family for years, the loud, protective sister I never had, and she wasn't about to let anyone from my past waltz back into my life without a fight. "You owe them nothing, Em," she said firmly. "They didn't show up for you when you needed them. They don't get to show up now that you've made it." I thought that was the end of it, until later that evening I checked my email and saw another ghostly name pop up in my inbox. Sophie. My heart sobbed. For a second, I couldn't even breathe. I hovered my cursor over it, debating whether to delete it unread. But curiosity got the better of me. The subject line was simple: "So happy for you." The email started out fake sweet, the kind of tone she used to use when she wanted something from me. "Hey sis, I know it's been forever, but mom told me the big news. Congrats. I saw some of your photos online. You look amazing and your fiance seems great. The whole family would love to come and celebrate with you. It would mean the world to mom and dad. Maybe we can put the past behind us." I swear I could feel my jaw clenching tighter with every sentence. Put the past behind us? Like the past was a little misunderstanding instead of a full-blown betrayal that destroyed my life. Like she hadn't lied about me stealing from her and watched while our parents threw me out without a second thought. I closed my laptop, stood up, and paced around the living room. The nerve of her, acting like we were long-lost best friends instead of enemies. I wasn't sure if I wanted to scream, cry, or laugh at how absurd it was. When Liam came home and saw me pacing, he didn't say anything at first. He just sat down, waited for me to hand over my phone, and read the email in silence. Then he looked up at me with calm, steady eyes and said, "You know, I think this isn't about them wanting to make peace. It's about them wanting to be seen next to what you built. You're successful now, you're happy, and they want to share the credit." That sentence cut through everything. Because he was right. It wasn't love, it was image. They wanted to erase their guilt by rewriting history, by being part of the picture when it suited them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that night years ago when my dad told me to leave and never come back. I remembered how Sophie stood there with crocodile tears while I begged them to believe me. I remembered the sting on my cheek when my mom slapped me, the way my father refused to meet my eyes. I remembered the cold night air hitting my face as I stepped out of that house for the last time. For so long, I dreamed about what I'd say to them if I ever saw them again. Now, I had a chance, and instead of rage, what I felt most was clarity. They hadn't broken me. I'd rebuilt myself without them. The next morning, while sipping my coffee, an idea started forming in my head. Not revenge, not even confrontation, but something poetic. I was planning my wedding, right? Every detail, from the decor to the guest list, was my vision. So what if, instead of sending them away or inviting them out of guilt, I used this as a statement? I wanted to show them exactly who I'd become. Not through words or shouting matches, but through success, grace, and the family I'd built for myself. I didn't need to stoop to their level. I could show them the truth just by existing as the woman they'd underestimated. I didn't tell Liam or Grace right away. I wanted to think it through. Over the next few days, while I was finalizing invitations, I quietly added one more, addressed to my parents and Sophie. But here's the twist. I didn't invite them as family. The envelope read, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson and guest. No mention of mom, dad, or sister. No sentimental note. Just a clean, polite, business-like invitation, the same I'd sent to a client I barely knew. Grace found out when she was helping me sort RSVPs and nearly choked on her coffee. "Wait, you actually invited them?" she asked, wide-eyed. "You're kidding, right?" I smiled. "Nope, I'm not inviting them out of love. I'm inviting them out of power." She didn't get it at first, but when I explained my plan, she started to grin. I wanted them to see the life I'd built, the people who loved me, the community that supported me, the success they tried to destroy. I wanted them to sit there and realize they no longer had any control or influence over me, that I wasn't their broken little girl anymore. I was the woman who turned pain into power, rejection into resilience. This, I told Grace, isn't about forgiveness. It's about closure. On my terms. As the weeks passed and the wedding preparations kicked into high gear, I focused on making everything perfect. Not for them, but for me. Every floral choice, every light arrangement, every guest table represented a piece of my journey. Grace and Liam supported me without question, though I could tell Liam was still a bit worried. One night, while we were reviewing the seating chart, he asked, "Are you sure you're ready to see them again?" I paused, thinking about it. "No," I admitted, "but I'm not doing this because I'm ready. I'm doing it because I refuse to let them haunt me anymore." He nodded slowly and pulled me into his arms. Then I'll be right there when it happens, he whispered. A week before the wedding, I got another message from Sophie. Shorter this time, a little less fake. Can't wait to see you, sis. I hope we can really talk. I didn't reply. She'd have her chance to see me. Just not in the way she expected. Because when the big day came, there wouldn't be any dramatic scenes or angry confrontations. There would just be me, standing in front of the world, loved, accomplished, radiant, and them, sitting in the back, realizing they lost me long before that night years ago. The ghosts from home were coming, but this time, I wasn't the scared, broken girl they'd thrown away. I was the woman who'd risen from the ruins, and I was about to show them exactly what they'd lost. The morning of my wedding, I woke up before sunrise, not out of nerves, but out of the kind of quiet excitement that hums deep in your chest when you know something big is coming. Not chaos, not fear, but a long-awaited peace. The room was still, the city outside barely waking, and I just sat there for a while, watching the light creep across the floorboards. Grace had crashed on the couch after making sure every last wedding detail was perfect. My phone was buzzing nonstop with texts from vendors and friends, but for once, I didn't feel that familiar rush of anxiety. I felt ready to marry the man who'd stood beside me when my world was rubble, ready to stand in front of everyone, including the ghosts who thought they'd buried me, and show them who I'd become. The venue was a dream. We'd chosen the same vineyard where I'd met Liam years ago, partly for nostalgia, partly because it had become this symbol of rebirth for me. Everything was glowing, pale gold drapes catching sunlight, soft white flowers everywhere, candles flickering in glass globes, tables set with linen so perfect it looked straight out of a magazine. It wasn't extravagant or flashy. It was intimate, elegant, real. Every person there mattered. Every guest was someone who would help me heal, laugh, or grow. My chosen family. The ceremony started right on time. Grace looked like she was about to cry before I even walked down the aisle, and Liam, oh, Liam. He stood there in his dark suit, nervous grin and all, looking at me like I was the only person on earth. As the music swelled and I stepped forward, I could feel every step of my journey behind me. The pain, the loneliness, the years of rebuilding all leading to this moment. And then, halfway down the aisle, I saw them. My parents, Sophie, sitting at the back like unwanted punctuation marks in an otherwise beautiful sentence. My stomach tightened for a split second, but I didn't stop walking. They weren't invited, but of course they'd shown up anyway. My mother was wearing this too bright smile, the kind that didn't touch her eyes. My father had his arm stiffly around her, like he was trying to appear respectable. And Sophie was dressed like she'd come to audition for the role of supportive sister in some family drama no one asked for. I saw her whisper something to Mom, who nodded, and I could practically feel their fake warmth radiating through the air. But here's the thing. It didn't shake me. Not this time. I'd prepared for this. The ceremony began and everything unfolded flawlessly. Grace gave her reading. Liam's best friend made everyone laugh with his speech, and for a while I forgot my family was even there. Then came the vows. Liam went first, and I swear his words could have melted stone. He talked about how love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about building something strong from imperfection, about choosing each other every single day. By the time he was done, half the guests were crying, including me. When it was my turn, I took a breath, glanced out at the sea of faces, the ones who loved me and the ones who once left me behind, and began. I used to think love was something you had to earn, I said softly. That if you were good enough, quiet enough, forgiving enough, people would finally see your worth. But life taught me that love isn't about earning, it's about being seen, even when you're at your lowest. It's about the people who stay when everyone else walks away. I didn't look directly at them, but I didn't need to. The silence in the room told me everyone knew who those words were for. Years ago, I continued, my voice steady. I lost everything because of lies. I was told I wasn't enough. I was thrown out and left to start over. But that pain built me. It made me strong. And standing here today, I realize every person who broke me only pushed me closer to the life I was meant to have. Because real family isn't the one that shares your blood. It's the one that shares your heart. There was a quiet murmur through the room, the kind that ripples through people when truth lands like a stone in still water. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Sophie's expression tighten, her fake smile slipping as if she finally realized the spotlight had shifted. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't crying. I was just telling my story and letting the weight of it rest where it belonged. The officiant moved things along, but I could feel the tension simmering behind me like static. After the ceremony, we moved to the reception area and the air shifted again lighter, filled with laughter and music. Everyone was mingling, dancing, toasting, celebrating. Everyone except them. I could feel their eyes on me from across the room, like ghosts trying to remind me they existed. I avoided them, choosing instead to soak in the joy, Grace spinning around the dance floor, Liam laughing with his friends, people raising glasses and cheering for us. But of course, drama never stays quiet for long. During dinner, while guests were lining up for the buffet, Sophie finally made her move. She approached our table, smile plastered on, holding a glass of champagne like she belonged there. "Emily," she said too brightly, "oh my God, everything is so beautiful. You really outdid yourself." Her voice had that sugary tone that made my skin crawl. I smiled politely. "Thank you, Sophie." She tilted her head, studying me. "I'm just so glad we could be here. I mean, after everything that happened, it's nice to see we can finally put it behind us." The audacity. I took a sip of my drink, keeping my composure. "You're right," I said calmly. "It's all behind me now." The way I emphasized me wasn't lost on her. She faltered for a second, like she wasn't sure how to respond. My mom appeared then, hands clasped, voice trembling with practiced emotion. "Emily, sweetheart, we just want you to know how proud we are of you. We've missed you so much." I met her gaze, smiling so faintly it almost hurt. "That's interesting," I said, "because I don't remember you missing me when I was living out of my car." The words came out soft, but they hit hard. Her expression crumpled, the act slipping. My dad muttered something under his breath, probably about making a scene, and I just turned away, ending the conversation without another word. Liam squeezed my hand under the table, silently grounding me. "You okay?" he whispered. I nodded, exhaling slowly. More than okay. Because the truth was, for the first time, I felt in control. They could try to play their little act, but the entire room could see the difference between their performance and my authenticity. Later, when it was time for speeches, Grace went first. She gave this heartfelt, hilarious toast about friendship and found family, and I laughed so hard I nearly ruined my makeup. Then it was my turn again, my final toast. I stood up, microphone in hand, the room quieting instantly. "I want to thank everyone here," I began, "for being part of my story. Some of you have been with me through every chapter, some joined later, but all of you are here because you've made my life brighter." I paused, scanning the room, lingering just a moment too long on the table in the back. I used to think that losing everything meant failure, but I see now it was the beginning. Sometimes life breaks you just enough to show you what you're made of, and sometimes the family you lose is the best thing that ever happens to you. The audience erupted in applause, not polite clapping, but real, emotional, thunderous support. I caught Sophie's face in that moment, red, trembling, fury barely contained. My mother looked like she wanted to cry. My father looked like he wanted to disappear, and I just smiled. Not out of cruelty, not even satisfaction, but peace, because I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need them to say sorry. Their humiliation wasn't my victory, my life was. Sophie stood up abruptly, muttered something I didn't catch, and stormed out of the venue, heels clicking like gunfire against the floor. My parents followed, their fake smiles completely gone. The door shut behind them, and the air felt lighter, like the ghost had finally left for good. The rest of the night was a blur of laughter, dancing, and pure joy. Grace hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "You did it," she whispered. Liam pulled me close during our first dance, murmuring, "You were incredible." And I realized I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was free. Free from their lies, from their control, from the ache that had once defined me. I'd built my life, my love, my happiness, and no one could take that away. That night, as the stars blinked above the vineyard and the last guest drifted home, I stood there, with Liam's hand in mine, watching the candlelight flicker across the tables. "You okay?" he asked again, that gentle smile I loved so much playing at his lips. I nodded, feeling tears of relief more than sadness. "Yeah," I whispered. "For the first time in my life, I really am." It's funny how peace doesn't arrive like some grand cinematic finale. It seeps in quietly, like morning light through the curtains you forgot to close. It had been 6 months since the wedding, and every morning still felt like a small miracle. I'd wake up next to Liam, sunlight tangled in his hair, his arm thrown lazily over my waist, and I'd just lie there for a few seconds, letting it sink in that this soft, simple, safe life was mine. No more waking up in someone's basement, wondering if I could afford breakfast. No more crying into my hands because I missed a family that didn't miss me. I was Emily Carter Thompson now, and that hyphen meant everything. It meant partnership. It meant balance. It meant a life I built myself, with someone who never asked me to be smaller just to fit into his world. Our days settled into a rhythm that felt both fresh and eternal. Coffee together before work, spontaneous kitchen dance parties, late night walks around the neighborhood with our rescue dog Milo. My business was booming. I'd become known as one of the best event planners in the city, and not just for my designs, but because every client knew I cared. Because I'd once known what it felt like to have no one in your corner. I poured that empathy into every wedding, every gala, every celebration I created. And yet, even in all that happiness, ghosts have a way of finding cracks to slip through. It started with a letter, a real old-fashioned envelope addressed in my mother's handwriting, sitting on our doorstep one breezy afternoon. For a moment, I just stared at it, like it was a live wire. I didn't open it right away. I put it on the counter and made tea, sat on the couch, pet Milo, and tried to breathe. Liam came home, saw it, and without asking, just sat next to me, his hand finding mine. "You don't have to open it," he said softly. "I know," I replied, "but I think I want to." Inside was a letter written in shaky cursive, full of words like regret and forgiveness and family. My mother wrote that after the wedding, people in town had started asking questions. Apparently, Sophie's version of events had begun to crumble. One of her old classmates had spilled the truth that she was the one who sabotaged her own scholarship and blamed me to cover it up. My parents had faced social backlash, lost friends, and even Sophie's fiancé had left her after hearing everything. Now, she was broken and sorry, and my parents were begging me to give family another chance. I read the letter twice, waiting for it to sting, but instead I felt nothing. Maybe a small ache, like a healed scar that itched when the weather changed, but that was it. I folded the letter neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and whispered, "No more." That night, I told Liam everything. He listened without interrupting, tracing small circles on my hand. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I smiled a little, realizing how far I'd come. "Nothing," I said. "I'm not going to fight them. I'm not going to forgive them either. I'm just going to live my life. That's enough." He nodded, and I could see pride flicker in his eyes. The next day, I mailed back a short note. Only one sentence. "I wish you healing, but I've already found mine." It wasn't cruel, it was closure. For the first time in 6 years, I didn't feel the weight of unfinished business pressing against my chest. A few weeks later, I decided to visit Aunt Claire. She had always been the one who quietly checked in on me after I was kicked out. The one who sent me a little money when she could, who mailed me a sweater one winter with a note that said, "You are still loved." When I arrived at her little cottage on the edge of town, she opened the door and hugged me so tightly I almost forgot to breathe. "There's my girl," she whispered, tears in her eyes. We sat on her porch for hours, sipping lemonade and catching up. She told me she'd heard about the wedding and how proud she was, not just of my success, but of my strength. "You know, Emily," she said, "some people never heal from betrayal like that. But you didn't just heal, you grew. You built something they can't touch." I smiled, blinking away tears. "I just didn't want to be like them," I said quietly. "I wanted to prove you can walk away and still be okay." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You did more than okay, sweetheart. You thrived." Before I left, she handed me an old photo album. Inside were pictures of me as a kid, birthday parties, piano recitals, Christmas mornings before everything went wrong. For a second, I hesitated, afraid it would reopen wounds. But as I flipped through the pages, I realized those memories didn't belong to my parents anymore. They were mine. The good moments, the laughter, the innocence before the betrayal. I didn't feel a need to erase them. I just needed to reclaim them. When I hugged Aunt Claire goodbye, I promised to visit more often. As I drove away, wind rushing through the open window, I felt lighter than I had in years. A few months later, on a warm Sunday morning, Liam and I drove past my old neighborhood. It wasn't planned. We were coming back from visiting a client nearby, and I just took a turn. My childhood home stood there, almost the same but smaller somehow, like nostalgia had magnified it in my memory. The paint was peeling, the garden was gone, and there was a for sale sign in the yard. I parked across the street and stepped out of the car. Liam didn't say a word. He just stayed by my side. I stood there, staring at the house where everything had fallen apart, and I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just done. That girl who'd stood on the porch 6 years ago, shaking, crying, clutching a duffel bag, she wasn't me anymore. She'd been broken, yes, but she'd rebuilt herself brick by brick until she stood tall again. Liam slipped his arm around me, and I leaned into him, watching the sunlight hit the windows. "You okay?" he murmured. "Yeah," I said softly. "I think I am." I took one last look at that house and smiled, not out of bitterness, but gratitude. It had been the place that broke me, but it also forced me to become who I was now. I turned to Liam and whispered, almost to myself, "They threw me out once. I built a life so beautiful, they had to beg to be part of it. But some doors, once closed, should stay that way." And with that, I got back in the car, rolled down the window, and as we drove away, I felt the final pieces of the past fall away behind us. The air was crisp, the road stretched wide ahead, and for the first time since that terrible night years ago, I really knew, that I was free. The end? I forgave the person who betrayed me, and it was harder than I expected. I used to think betrayal was something that happened in movies, not in real life. And definitely not in mine, because I'd built my entire existence around two people I trusted more than anyone in the world. Sophie, my fiance, and Ethan, my best friend since we were kids, the kind of friend who knew every embarrassing secret I'd ever had, who'd seen me through braces, heartbreaks, and all-night study sessions, the one who helped me move into my first apartment, who was supposed to stand next to me at my wedding as my best man. And Sophie, the woman who I believed was my future, the one I imagined growing old with, having kids with, the one who'd once said she felt safest when she was in my arms, and for years I believed her. We'd been together for 5 years, engaged for one, planning a small wedding in Oregon where we grew up, and everything felt stable, comfortable, predictable in the best way possible. I had a decent job as a software engineer, Sophie was a nurse, Ethan worked in real estate, and between the three of us, there was this rhythm. Like, we were a trio that life couldn't touch, until it did. The night it all fell apart is burned into my mind with cruel precision, every second of it vivid, like a scar I can't stop touching. It was late October, raining hard, one of those nights when the world feels quieter than usual, like it's holding its breath. I'd stayed late at work finishing up a product demo and decided to text Ethan to grab a drink. But when I unlocked my phone, I saw a message pop up from Sophie, except it wasn't meant for me. It read, "He's gone for the night. You can come over now." My brain froze. I stared at the screen, rereading it over and over like my eyes were playing tricks on me. Like maybe autocorrect had gone rogue or maybe she meant someone else entirely. But my gut twisted instantly. And that instinct, that cold, sinking feeling, told me exactly what I didn't want to believe. I texted back, pretending nothing was wrong, and said I'd be home in 20 minutes. She didn't reply. That silence screamed louder than any words could. When I pulled into our driveway, the lights were dim inside, the rain hitting my windshield like static, and I remember sitting there for a full minute, just gripping the steering wheel, breathing in and out, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. But then I saw Ethan's car parked 2 blocks down, barely visible through the rain. I recognized the dented front bumper instantly. I don't even remember walking up the steps. My mind just went blank, like survival mode kicked in. When I opened the door, I heard laughter, soft, familiar. I followed it to the living room, and there they were. Sophie sitting on the couch, wearing one of my shirts, and Ethan standing close to her, his hand on her leg. They looked up like they'd seen a ghost, and for a second, none of us moved. Then, Ethan stepped back and muttered something, but my ears were ringing. I couldn't even hear my own voice when I said, "How long?" Sophie started crying immediately, covering her mouth like she could hide the truth behind her hands, and Ethan just stood there, staring at the floor, muttering, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." I wanted to hit him. God, every part of me wanted to break something to make the pain stop, but I couldn't move. I just felt empty, like my body was there, but my heart had already left. Sophie tried to explain, said it had been going on for months, that she didn't plan it, that it just happened, that she still loved me. And I remember laughing, actually laughing, because it sounded so absurd, so pathetic, like love could coexist with betrayal. I told them both to get out, and when Ethan tried to say he was sorry, I lost it. I yelled, threw my phone across the room, told him I never wanted to see him again, told Sophie I hope she got everything she wanted, because she just destroyed the one person who would have done anything for her. They left without another word. The silence after they walked out was the loudest thing I've ever heard. I sat on the floor for hours, staring at the spot where they'd been, my chest physically aching like someone had reached in and ripped something out. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't eat for 2 days after. I kept replaying it all in my head. Every memory, every laugh, every small sign I might have missed. The night she told me she was working late, but came home smelling like Ethan's cologne. The times Ethan canceled plans with me, saying he was seeing someone new. I wanted to erase it all, but I couldn't. My mind was a torture chamber. I deleted their numbers, blocked them everywhere, packed up half the apartment, and moved in temporarily with my mom in Portland. I was 29, broken, and humiliated. My mom tried to comfort me, but there's only so much you can do when someone's soul feels cracked. I'd wake up sweating from nightmares, sometimes thinking I heard Sophie's voice, and then the reality would hit me again like a punch to the gut. I lost weight, stopped going out, started drinking more than I should have. My coworkers noticed, but I brushed it off. I told everyone I was fine. I wasn't. I'd scroll through social media sometimes, see Ethan smiling in old photos, and I'd feel this violent wave of rage, this fantasy of confronting him again, of saying all the things I didn't get to say. But I knew it wouldn't fix anything. Nothing could. The days blurred together until I finally decided I couldn't live like that anymore. I needed to escape the reminders. That's when I took a job offer in Seattle. It wasn't glamorous, smaller company, lower pay, but it was far away, and that's all I cared about. I found a small studio apartment near the waterfront, packed what was left of my life into 2 suitcases, and left Oregon behind. The first few weeks in Seattle felt like exile. I'd walk along the piers at night, headphones in, the cold air biting at my face, wondering how I'd gone from planning a wedding to being completely alone. But over time, that solitude started to feel less like punishment and more like a strange kind of therapy. No one here knew me. No one knew what I'd been through. I could just exist. I started therapy after my mom begged me to try. At first, I hated it. Sitting across from a stranger, trying to untangle years of trust and grief, it felt pointless. But my therapist, Dr. Patel, didn't push. He just listened. For weeks, I mostly sat there in silence until one day he said something that stuck. Forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the chains they left on you. I didn't believe him then, but the words lingered. Still, at that time, I wasn't ready to forgive. I was angry. I wanted to hold on to that anger because it was the only thing that made me feel strong. Like, if I stayed mad, they couldn't hurt me again. But anger is a liar. It drains you. It makes you smaller. I started realizing that whenever I replayed that night in my head, I wasn't punishing them. I was punishing myself. I couldn't go 5 minutes without thinking about it, about them, and I started to hate how much space they still occupied in my mind. Every time I thought about Sophie's face that night, the tears, the excuses, or Ethan's silence, that same wave of nausea hit me and I'd find myself gripping the sink just to stay upright. I'd look in the mirror and barely recognize the person staring back. That's when I started journaling, not because I wanted to heal, but because I needed to survive. I wrote about the betrayal, the memories, the rage, the loneliness, everything. And slowly, writing became a release valve. I started going to the gym again, cooking my own meals, even taking small trips outside the city. For the first time in months, I caught myself laughing at something stupid online, and it scared me because I realized I was starting to live again. But even then, the pain was still there, like a scar under my ribs that would sting when I breathed too deeply. Sometimes I'd see couples holding hands and feel this ache of jealousy. Not because I missed Sophie, but because I missed the version of myself that believed in forever. I missed the innocence of trusting someone completely. Still, as time went on, I began to understand that healing isn't linear. It's messy. Some days you feel okay. Others, you feel like you're back at day one. I stopped blaming myself eventually. I stopped trying to make sense of why they did it. People hurt others, not always out of malice, but out of weakness, selfishness, confusion. But that realization didn't make it hurt any less. I didn't know what forgiveness looked like yet, but I knew hate was eating me alive. There was this one night when I stood by the ocean, the Seattle wind cutting through my jacket, and I just screamed. This raw, guttural sound that came from somewhere deep inside. Afterward, I felt strangely calm, like something had shifted. That's when it hit me. I'd been carrying this poison inside me for too long, waiting for some kind of justice that would never come. Sophie and Ethan were gone, living their own consequences, and I was the one still trapped in that night. I didn't know if I'd ever forgive them, but I knew I didn't want to keep living in the shadow of their choices. For the first time since everything happened, I wanted peace. Not revenge, not closure, just peace. And maybe deep down, that was the first tiny seed of forgiveness taking root, even if I couldn't name it yet. When people talk about healing, they make it sound like a straight line. Like, one day you just wake up, stretch, and decide you're over it. But the truth is, it's more like walking barefoot over broken glass. Every step hurts, even when you think you're getting somewhere. After I moved to Seattle, time didn't fix anything on its own. But therapy started to do something I didn't expect. It slowed the chaos down. Dr. Patel was calm in a way that made silence feel safe. He never tried to feed me cliches about moving on or finding someone better. Instead, he asked me questions that sat with me long after our sessions ended. What are you holding on to? What do you think you'd lose if you let it go? At first, I didn't know. I told him I hated Ethan, that I hated Sophie, that I hated myself for not seeing it coming. He said anger can feel powerful, but it's really just grief wearing armor, and somehow that cracked something open in me. I started keeping a notebook, writing down every thought that made me clench my jaw. Every flash of memory that burned. The pages filled fast. Anger, jealousy, loneliness. But between the lines, I started catching glimpses of the person I used to be before everything went wrong. Around that time, I started my new job at a small tech company downtown. The kind with free coffee, messy desks, and people who talked in code and memes. I was quiet the first few weeks, trying to blend in, until one afternoon, a woman from the next cubicle leaned over and said, "You always look like you're trying not to disappear." That was Lila Hayes, product designer, the kind of person who made conversation feel effortless. She had this way of asking questions that didn't feel like prying, just human curiosity. We started eating lunch together, then walking out for coffee breaks, and soon we were sharing playlists and trading stories about our childhoods. She told me she'd moved from Chicago after a bad breakup and didn't really trust people either. There was no flirting, no hidden agenda. It was just two slightly broken people trying to breathe again. For months, that friendship became my anchor. We'd go hiking on weekends, sometimes drive out to the coast just to watch the waves crash, and she'd listen when I talked about Sophie and Ethan without judging, without pity. She never said, "You'll find someone else." She just said, "You survived it." And somehow, that meant more. I started cooking again. Simple stuff. Pasta, stir fry, my mom's chili recipe. Lila would joke that I was slowly turning into a functioning adult again. My mom, bless her, called every Sunday, still worrying like I was 16. She kept reminding me that pain changes people but doesn't have to harden them. I didn't believe her at first, but then I caught myself laughing with Lila over burnt garlic one night and it hit me. I hadn't laughed like that in over a year. It felt strange, like my lungs had forgotten how to expand that far. The nightmares started fading too. Dr. Patel introduced me to meditation, and even though I thought it sounded like new age nonsense, it worked. 5 minutes of breathing could quiet storms that used to last days. I began sleeping through the night again. There were setbacks, of course. Songs that triggered me. Couples holding hands, the random ache when I passed a jewelry store. But they didn't own me anymore. I remember one session where Dr. Patel said, "Every time you replay what they did, you're giving them another minute of your life. Do they deserve that?" The question gutted me because the answer was obvious. No, they didn't. So I tried something new. I started forgiving myself first. For ignoring red flags, for loving too blindly, for not being perfect. It felt unnatural at first, like I was betraying my own pain, but over time it became freeing. Lila noticed the difference before I did. She said my eyes looked lighter. Life slowly became bearable again. I started volunteering on weekends at a community tech workshop for kids, teaching them coding basics, and that gave me a sense of purpose I didn't realize I'd lost. I wasn't healed, not completely, but I was living again. And then, out of nowhere, the past found me. It was a Thursday morning in early spring, and I came home to a plain white envelope tucked under my apartment door. No return address, just my name written in Ethan's handwriting. Slanted, familiar, unmistakable. My stomach dropped. I stood there, staring at it for minutes, debating whether to tear it up or set it on fire. Eventually, curiosity, or maybe some buried hunger for closure, won. Inside was a handwritten letter, shaky and raw. He wrote that he'd been sober for 6 months, that Sophie had left him a year after everything happened, that he lost almost everything: friends, work, confidence. He said he thought about what he did every day, that there wasn't a day he didn't wish he could undo it, that he didn't expect forgiveness but wanted me to know he was sorry, truly sorry, and that he was in Seattle visiting family if I ever wanted to talk. I read it twice, my hands trembling, my heart pounding in that same painful rhythm I thought I'd forgotten. Suddenly, all the progress, all the therapy felt fragile, like a house built on glass. Part of me wanted to crumple the letter and throw it away, but another part, smaller, quieter, whispered that maybe hearing him out could finally end the noise in my head. For days, I carried that letter everywhere, folded neatly in my pocket, unread but heavy. I told no one, not even Lila. At work, I caught myself zoning out, imagining what I'd say if I saw him. Would I scream? Would I forgive him? Did he even deserve to breathe the same air as me? Dr. Patel noticed my tension in our next session, and when I told him about the letter, he didn't give me advice. He just said, "Closure isn't something you find in others, it's something you decide for yourself." That line haunted me for a week. One evening, I went to my favorite coffee shop by the waterfront, the one with creaky floors and a view of the ferries, and I pulled out Ethan's letter again. The paper was already soft from being handled so much. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the dark water, and for the first time I realized I wasn't angry. I was scared. Scared that seeing him would drag me backward, but also scared that not seeing him meant I'd never really let go. I sat there for a long time, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, watching strangers laugh around me, feeling that old ache but also something new, a strange calm underneath it. Maybe healing wasn't about erasing the pain. Maybe it was about learning to carry it differently. I looked down at Ethan's handwriting, at the apology I never thought I'd see, and I thought of Lila, my mom, Dr. Patel, all the people who'd helped me rebuild piece by piece. I didn't know what I'd do yet, whether I'd meet him or not, but I knew I wasn't the same person who'd been shattered that rainy night in Oregon. I was someone learning how to stand again, and for the first time, the decision didn't feel like vengeance or weakness. It felt like choice. I folded the letter, slipped it back into my jacket, and whispered to myself, maybe this is what peace looks like. Then I took another sip of coffee, watching the tide rise and fall, knowing the next step was mine alone. It took me almost 2 weeks to decide whether I was ready to see Ethan again. And even then, I wasn't sure if it was courage or exhaustion that finally pushed me to do it. Because sometimes peace doesn't come from strength. It comes from being tired of carrying the weight. I texted him using the number he'd written at the end of his letter, half expecting it to be disconnected, half hoping it would be. He answered almost immediately. "Thank you for replying. Whenever you're ready." We agreed to meet at a small diner on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place that smelled like coffee and rain and nostalgia. The morning of the meeting, I stared at myself in the mirror longer than I should have, trying to recognize the person who was about to face the ghost of his past. I wasn't the same man who'd found them together that night. I'd rebuilt parts of myself, filled others with silence, but there was still a part of me that trembled, afraid of reopening a wound that had finally started to scar. When I arrived, Ethan was already there, sitting at a booth by the window. For a second, I didn't even recognize him. His hair was thinner, his shoulders hunched, his eyes hollow in a way I'd never seen before. The confidence, the charm, the easy laughter, all of it was gone. He looked up when I approached, and for a heartbeat we just stared at each other, the air thick with all the things we hadn't said. He tried to smile, but it collapsed into a grimace. "Hey, Ryan," he said softly, and I just nodded. We sat there in silence for a while, both pretending to study the menu even though neither of us could eat. When the waitress poured us coffee, his hands shook as he thanked her. Finally, he looked up and said, "I don't know where to start." I said, "The truth usually works." And then the floodgates opened. He told me everything, how the affair started during a rough patch in his own life, how he confused comfort for love, how he hated himself every day but didn't know how to stop. He said Sophie had left him about a year later, said she couldn't live with what they'd done, that she'd tried to contact me once but lost her nerve. He said he'd hit rock bottom after that, drinking too much, losing clients, eventually checking himself into rehab. He looked up at me, eyes glassy, voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said. "I just needed to tell you that I was wrong. I hurt the only person who ever had my back. I wish I could undo it. I'd give anything to undo it." For a long moment, I said nothing. I just listened because there was something haunting about seeing the man who'd once been the center of every good memory I had now sitting across from me as a ghost of himself. Part of me wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the moral high ground that had become my shield, but another part, smaller, quieter, felt something I didn't expect. Sadness. Not for what he'd done, but for what we'd lost. Do you ever think about that night? I finally asked. He nodded instantly. Every single day. His voice cracked. It was the moment I realized what kind of man I'd become, and I hated myself for it. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time I saw not the villain in my story, but a broken human being who had made the worst mistake of his life and had to live with it. We sat there for what felt like hours, our words stumbling between apology and silence. At some point, I realized my anger wasn't burning anymore. It was just tired embers. Forgiveness wasn't about saying what he did was okay. It was about acknowledging that I couldn't keep dragging his sin behind me like a chain. I forgive you, I said finally, and even as I said it, my voice shook. Ethan froze, eyes wide, tears pooling. You don't have to. I'm not doing it for you. I said quietly, I'm doing it for me. I'm tired of letting that night control who I am. He nodded, pressing his hands to his face as he started to cry. We sat there in silence, two men who had once called each other brothers, now just trying to make peace with the wreckage. When we finally stood to leave, he hugged me. I didn't hug him back right away, but then I did, because holding on felt easier than hate for the first time in years. As I walked out of that diner, the air felt different. Lighter somehow, like I just dropped a backpack I didn't realize I'd been wearing. That night, I went home, sat at my desk, and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. I started writing to Sophie. Not a love letter, not a goodbye, but a release. I told her everything I never said. The hurt, the confusion, the anger, but also the gratitude for the lessons I'd learned. I wrote that I hoped she'd found peace, that I no longer wished her pain, and that I was finally ready to let her go. When I finished, I folded the letter, went outside to the small balcony overlooking the city, and lit it with a match. I watched the paper curl and blacken, the flames eating away the last traces of what used to define me. As the ashes drifted into the night, I felt something lift from my chest, something I'd been carrying since that rainy night years ago. The next morning, I drove out to the Oregon coast, back to the same beach where Ethan, Sophie, and I used to sit as teenagers, dreaming about the future. The sky was overcast, the waves restless, the air thick with salt and memory. I walked down to the shoreline and stood there barefoot, letting the water rush over my feet, cold and grounding. I thought about how much had changed, how much AITA had changed. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a single act. It was a choice I'd have to keep making every day, every time the old pain tried to resurface, but it was mine now, not theirs. I took a deep breath, feeling the wind whip against my face, and for the first time in years, I smiled. Not because everything was fixed, but because I no longer needed it to be. Life wasn't about erasing the scars. It was about learning how to live with them without letting them define you. I thought of Ethan somewhere, trying to rebuild his own life, of Sophie wherever she was, hopefully learning too, and I whispered to the ocean, I forgive you both. The waves answered with their endless rhythm, soft and steady like a heartbeat older than any of our mistakes. I turned away then, walking back toward my car as the first hints of sunlight broke through the clouds, and for once I didn't look back. Because in that moment, I finally understood that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't make what happened right. It just sets you free. And as the wind carried the sound of the waves behind me, I smiled and whispered to myself, forgiving them didn't make them right. It made me whole again. The end. I fell for my brother's best friend and it destroyed everything before it saved me. I never thought a single rule could shape my whole life, but for as long as I can remember, my brother Ethan's one unbreakable law was simple. Never touch my sister. I used to roll my eyes at it when I was younger. Back when I was just the kid trailing behind Ethan and his best friend Michael Reed, the boy who practically lived in our house and somehow managed to feel like both family and mystery all at once. I was 13 when I first realized Michael wasn't just another one of Ethan's friends. He was tall, funny in a quiet way, the kind of guy who looked at people like he actually listened, and when he smiled, I swore it felt like sunlight on cold water. He'd mess up my hair, tease me about my braces, call me kid, and I'd pretend to hate it while secretly wishing he'd never stop. Ethan and Michael were inseparable back then. Late night gaming sessions, football practice, camping trips, and I was always the little sister tagging along, pretending not to stare too long when Michael laughed. Then, after high school, Michael joined the military, and just like that, he was gone. For years, all I saw were the occasional photos on Ethan's phone, a few group chats, and once, a postcard from a desert base that simply said, tell your brother I'm still alive and you keep smiling, kid. I was 17 and my heart didn't know what to do with that line, so I tucked it inside a book and pretended it didn't mean anything. Fast forward 8 years and I was 25, juggling a part-time cafe job and a psychology master's degree. I wasn't sure I could finish without losing my mind. Life had a rhythm, quiet, predictable, a little lonely, but I'd made peace with it. Then Ethan called one afternoon and said casually, "Guess who's back in town?" And I swear my stomach flipped like I'd swallowed a storm. That weekend, we hosted a barbecue in our backyard, the same place that once held my 13th birthday party, and there he was, Michael Reed, standing near the grill with a beer in hand, wearing that same lopsided grin, but now with a few faint lines around his eyes and a calm heaviness that came from years of living too hard. The air felt different the second our eyes met. He said, "Hey, Sia," in that low, familiar voice, and it was like time folded in half. I wanted to say something clever, something adult, but all that came out was, "Hey, stranger," before I laughed way too nervously. The whole evening felt like a dance I didn't know the steps to. Casual talk layered with glances that lingered half a second too long. He asked about my studies. I asked about the military, and his eyes dimmed for a heartbeat before he changed the subject. At one point, Ethan called him over to help with the grill, and I caught him looking back at me. Just once, and that tiny flicker of connection burned through me like a secret. After everyone left, I stayed behind to clean up, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But then, Michael came back through the gate, carrying the jacket he'd forgotten. "Need help?" he asked, and even though it was such a normal question, something about the way he said it made it impossible to breathe. We talked for an hour, maybe more, about nothing and everything, how he'd missed normal coffee, how I still hated mornings, how small our town felt after leaving it. When he finally said goodnight, I remember leaning against the door after he left, heart pounding like I was 16 again. A few days later, a summer storm rolled in out of nowhere. The rain hammered the windows, the wind howled, and the power blinked out right when Ethan got called for an emergency at work. He's a paramedic, so I was alone. Or I thought I was until a knock echoed through the dark. It was Michael, soaked to the bone, saying, "Ethan told me to check on you since the lines are down." I let him in, handed him a towel, and we lit a few candles. The living room glowed with that warm orange light that makes everything feel closer. We sat on the couch, listening to the thunder roll, talking about what storms used to mean when we were kids. How Ethan once convinced us lightning could grant wishes if we counted the seconds right. Michael laughed softly, then said, "You've grown up, Sia." I joked, "You notice?" And he looked at me with this expression, half sad, half something I couldn't name. For a few moments, the silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy in the kind of way that means something's about to change. He started telling me about the military, about friends he lost, the noise that never leaves your head even when everything's quiet. How hard it is to come home and not feel like a ghost. I listened, really listened, and at one point, when his voice cracked, I reached out without thinking and touched his hand. He didn't pull away. The storm outside grew louder, flashes of light breaking through the window, and I could hear my heart over the rain. He looked at me like he was searching for permission he already knew he shouldn't want. Then he whispered, "Your brother would kill me." And I whispered back, "He's not here." It wasn't planned. It wasn't even logical. It just happened. The kind of moment you can't explain later because words ruin it. We kissed, slow and unsure at first, like both of us were afraid the world might stop spinning. When we finally pulled apart, the silence felt heavier than the thunder. He ran a hand through his hair, muttered something about how this couldn't happen, and I nodded, pretending I agreed even though every part of me screamed not to. "I should go," he said, voice rough, and before I could stop him, he was gone, leaving only the faint smell of rain and the echo of what just happened. I sat there for hours, trying to convince myself it didn't mean anything, that it was just a storm or nostalgia or loneliness playing tricks, but the truth is, I'd never felt more awake. The next morning, Ethan texted our group chat like nothing had happened, asking if anyone wanted brunch. Michael didn't reply. Not that day, not the next. A week passed, then 2, and he disappeared again. No visits, no calls. Ethan said he'd taken a short trip out of town for some personal stuff, and I just nodded, pretending not to care, but every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened. I told myself it was a mistake, that it was better this way, but it didn't stop the dreams or the way my heart jumped whenever I heard his name. Sometimes, late at night, I'd replay that moment in the candlelight, the sound of rain, the taste of fear and hope tangled together, and I'd wonder if he felt the same guilt, the same ache. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. All I knew was that something between us had shifted forever, and no amount of pretending could undo it. I broke the only rule Ethan ever made, and even if no one else knew yet, part of me was terrified. Not just of getting caught, but of what it meant if the one thing I wasn't supposed to want was the only thing that ever felt real. And that's how it started. The mistake that wasn't really a mistake. The secret that would follow me long after the storm cleared. And the moment I realized that love doesn't always knock. Sometimes it breaks through the door you swore you'd never open. The days after that storm felt like living inside a pause button. Everything looked the same on the outside, but inside, nothing was the same anymore. I tried to bury myself in work, in my grad papers, in the hum of the espresso machine at the cafe, but every quiet moment turned into a replay of that night. How it started with thunder and ended with silence. Michael hadn't texted, called, or stopped by, and Ethan didn't notice at first, but he started picking up on how distracted I'd become. "You good?" he asked one morning as he poured coffee, and I lied, saying I was just tired. The truth was, I couldn't stop wondering if I'd imagined the connection. If maybe the kiss had meant nothing to him while it rearranged everything inside me. The small town we lived in doesn't give you much space to hide though. Every corner seemed to carry a memory, and every sound of a truck outside made my pulse jump like it could be him. Weeks passed before I finally saw him again, unexpectedly, at the grocery store. He was standing in the frozen aisle, reaching for something, and when he saw me, his hand froze midair. The silence between us was thick enough to choke on, but I managed a shaky hi. He looked exhausted, eyes shadowed, posture tense, and his voice was softer than I remembered when he said, "Hey Sia." It wasn't awkward exactly, just heavy, like both of us knew words wouldn't fix anything. Before I could ask why he'd disappeared, Ethan's name flashed across my phone, reminding me that every second of this conversation was borrowed. Michael noticed and gave a half smile. "You should go," he said, but then added almost too quietly, "I owe you an explanation." He didn't give it there though. He just told me to meet him at the lake on Sunday evening. The lake had always been our family's escape. A quiet place ringed by pine trees where Ethan used to fish and Michael used to show me constellations when I was little. I almost didn't go. Half of me thought it was better to let the whole thing fade into a memory, but the other half, the one still remembered how his voice sounded in the dark, won. When I arrived, the sun was slipping behind the hills, turning the water gold. Michael was already there, sitting on the dock, skipping stones like it was muscle memory. I sat down beside him, careful to leave space. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I didn't mean to disappear, I just didn't want to drag you into something you didn't sign up for." I asked what he meant, and that's when he told me about the nightmares, the noise that never stops, the sleepless nights, and the therapist he'd been seeing twice a week since coming back. He said he couldn't look at me without feeling guilty, like he was contaminating something good with all the brokenness he carried. Hearing that made the pieces click. The faraway look, the tension, the way he kept his hands clasped like he was holding himself together. I told him I didn't need him to be perfect, that I just wanted honesty, but he shook his head. "You don't get it, Sia. Your brother wouldn't forgive me. And if you ever saw what I see at night, you wouldn't forgive me either." There was pain in his voice, the kind that doesn't ask for pity, just space to breathe. I didn't know what to say, so I did the only thing that felt right. I sat beside him in silence, letting the waves do the talking. Eventually, he turned toward me and said, "I think about that night more than I should." It wasn't a confession so much as a surrender. I told him I did too, and something in his expression softened, like the fight inside him finally eased. We didn't promise anything, didn't plan anything. We just started meeting sometimes. Coffee runs, walks, stolen hours at the park. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't entirely innocent either. The conversations grew deeper, the laughs easier. We talked about everything, books, fears, what ifs, but always danced around the truth. And every time we said goodbye, it felt like pulling away from gravity itself. I told myself it wasn't wrong, that we were just friends who understood each other in ways others didn't. But I knew better. I kept my phone on silent around Ethan, terrified he'd see a message I couldn't explain. Michael started leaving notes instead of texts, short, simple ones like, "Thinking of you," or "Stay warm today." It was sweet, almost painfully so, but underneath it all was tension, the kind that hums just below the surface, waiting to crack. Then came the day everything started to unravel. Ethan had been unusually watchful, asking about where I'd been going after work, joking about me acting suspicious. I laughed it off, but my voice didn't sound right, even to me. That weekend, I drove out to meet Michael near the trail by the lake. Nothing romantic, just a quiet moment, or at least that's what I told myself. It was colder than usual, so he'd lent me his jacket, a worn-out army green one that smelled faintly like cedar and coffee. I hadn't realized I'd forgotten it in the back seat until days later. When Ethan offered to drive my car to the shop for an oil change, I didn't think twice. I came home to find him waiting at the kitchen table, that jacket folded in front of him like evidence. "You want to explain why Michael's jacket was in your car?" he asked, voice calm in the way that's more dangerous than shouting. My stomach dropped. I tried to think of a lie, but my mouth went dry. "He must have left it there after we ran into each other," I said too quickly. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Ran into each other? Or something else?" I opened my mouth, closed it again. He leaned back, exhaling sharply. "You've got to be kidding me, Sia. Tell me you didn't." I wanted to, but lying felt worse than admitting it. "It's not what you think," I said, even though it probably was. He pushed back from the table and ran a hand through his hair. "He's my best friend, my brother in every way that counts. You were the one thing off limits, Sia. You know that." The weight of his disappointment hit harder than any anger could have. I tried to explain that Michael had been struggling, that I just wanted to be there for him, but Ethan wasn't hearing it. "You don't get to fix him," he said, "and he doesn't get to use you as a lifeline." Then he grabbed his keys and left, the door slamming so hard it rattled the frame. After that, the silence in the house was suffocating. I tried calling Michael, but he didn't pick up. Maybe Ethan had already confronted him. Maybe Michael was too ashamed. The next morning, I found a note on my doorstep. No return address, no name, just 3 words. "I'm sorry, Sia." I didn't know if it meant he regretted what we'd shared or that he regretted getting caught, but either way, the meaning was the same. It was over, at least for now. Still, as I stood there, holding that note, I realized something Ethan never would. I hadn't been trying to save Michael. I was trying to understand him because in his brokenness, I'd found reflections of my own. And yet, love built on secrets can only last so long before the truth demands its turn. I didn't know it then, but the jacket wasn't the last thing Ethan would find. It was only the first crack in a wall that was about to come crashing down. When everything finally blew up, it didn't happen in slow motion, the way people describe. It happened like a match dropped into gasoline. Ethan showed up at my apartment unannounced one Friday night, and I knew something was wrong the second I opened the door. He wasn't yelling yet, but his jaw was tight, and his eyes looked like someone who had been replaying the same betrayal on a loop. He held up his phone, and on the screen was a photo, one of me and Michael sitting at the lake from weeks ago. We weren't doing anything wrong, not technically, but the way we looked at each other told the whole story. "You lied," he said, his voice rough and quiet in that way that's worse than shouting. "You lied to my face." I tried to speak, to explain that it wasn't planned, that it wasn't meant to hurt him, but he didn't want to hear it. He said Michael had already confessed, that he'd confronted him earlier that day. "I told him we were done," Ethan said. "I told him I never wanted to see him again." He was pacing, hands shaking, voice cracking between anger and disbelief. "You were the one person I thought would never do this," he said. I wanted to say I never meant to, that I'd tried so hard to fight it. But how do you explain something that doesn't make sense even to you? Then Mom called. I should have known Ethan would tell her. He always thought of truth as something that fixes things, not something that can destroy them. Within hours, both our parents were at the house sitting me down in that living room I grew up in, looking at me like I'd turned into a stranger. "You're too smart for this," Mom said, voice sharp, like disappointment disguised as concern. "He's your brother's friend. This isn't love, it's confusion." Dad didn't say much, just shook his head, muttering something about respect and family boundaries. I kept my eyes on the floor, feeling smaller by the second. Every attempt to explain sounded weaker than the last, so eventually, I stopped trying. That night ended with me packing a duffel bag while Mom stood in the doorway asking, "Where are you even going?" I didn't know. I just knew I couldn't stay. I found a small apartment downtown, the kind that smelled like dust and freedom, and started over with more silence than I thought I could stand. Michael tried calling a few times, but I ignored it at first, not out of anger, but because I didn't know what to say. I knew Ethan had cut him off completely, blocked, unfollowed, erased. Michael's guilt must have been crushing, because when we finally spoke, his voice sounded hollow. "I never wanted to come between you two," he said. "I should have walked away that night." I told him it wasn't his fault, that I made my own choices, but he didn't believe me. He said he was going to leave town for a while, maybe stay with a friend out of state, just until things settle. But nothing really settles when people you love stop speaking to each other. It just turns into quiet regret. The days blurred into routine. Work, study, sleep, repeat, but the emptiness stayed. Ethan didn't text. Mom sent one message asking if I'd come to my senses yet. I didn't reply. Then, 3 weeks later, it happened. I was closing up at the cafe when one of Ethan's co-workers came rushing in, out of breath, saying there'd been an accident. "It's Michael," he said. He pulled someone out of a burning car." My heart stopped. I didn't even think. I drove straight to the hospital, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. When I got there, the waiting room was dim and cold, and the nurse at the desk asked if I was family. For a second, I almost said no, but then I said yes. They let me see him once he was stable. Bandaged arm, bruised face, a mess of IV lines, but alive. He opened his eyes when he heard my voice, and the first thing he said was, "You shouldn't be here." I laughed through tears, saying, "You say that every time, and look where it gets us." He smiled weakly. "Some habits don't change." We sat there for a long time, not talking much. I told him Ethan still hated him, that my family hadn't forgiven me either, but somehow it didn't matter as much in that moment. He said he didn't remember much from the accident, just that there was a car flipped over near the gas station and he couldn't just drive past. Typical Michael, running into chaos when everyone else runs away. I told him he was an idiot for risking his life like that, and he said, "Guess I'm still trying to make up for my mistakes." I wanted to tell him he didn't have to, that saving a stranger didn't erase what happened, but maybe it showed who he really was. When I left the hospital that night, the air felt different, cleaner, maybe, or lighter. I didn't know what would happen next. I just knew that love, for all its rules and wreckage, still finds a way to show up when you least expect it. Maybe we weren't meant to fix everything. Maybe we were just meant to understand it. And as I walked out into the cold, I realized something simple but true. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It just shows you who's willing to stay when everything else falls apart. Months drifted by like slow-moving clouds after a storm, and in that time, I learned what silence really feels like. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind that sits in your chest, like weight you can't quite exhale. College became my sanctuary. I buried myself in books, projects, anything that kept my mind busy and my heart from wandering back to the wreckage we'd left behind. Ethan still wouldn't talk to me. Not a message, not even a glance when he passed by at family gatherings he couldn't skip. The first few times hurt like nothing else, but after a while, I stopped expecting anything. You can't force healing on someone who isn't ready for it. I tried focusing on myself instead. Therapy sessions, long walks by the river, even learning to cook something other than instant noodles. Every step felt small, but at least it was forward. Meanwhile, Michael had disappeared from the spotlight. After the accident, he moved to a quieter part of the town and started volunteering with a local veterans group, helping people struggling with PTSD. He told me once that saving that stranger that night made him realize something, that maybe, just maybe, the universe was giving him a second chance to make something good out of the chaos. We didn't talk every day, but when we did, it felt real, not desperate or rushed, just two people rebuilding slowly, carefully, like learning to breathe again. One day, I saw an article about him in the local paper. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, just a short feature about a man helping veterans through art therapy and hiking retreats. The photo showed him smiling, surrounded by a group of men laughing around a campfire, and something inside me eased for the first time in months. He wasn't running anymore, he was healing, and in a way, so was I. My professors noticed the difference. Too, my grades improved, I started tutoring freshmen, and I even joined a student counseling club. I guess when you've been through enough storms, you learn how to help others find their way through rain. Still, there were nights when I'd sit by the window, phone in hand, wondering if Ethan ever thought about us, not just me and Michael, but the way we all used to be before everything broke. I miss my brother, even if he hated me. There's a certain ache that only siblings can cause, and no amount of logic ever makes it go away. The real shift came unexpectedly. It was late spring when I got an invitation in the mail for a local lakeside festival, the same one where we all first met years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. I hesitated at first, unsure if showing up would reopen wounds or start something new, but something about it felt like closure waiting to happen. So I went. The place hadn't changed much. Same laughter, same food stalls, same shimmering reflection of the sky on the water. I found myself standing at the same dock where I'd once sat between two boys who meant the world to me, not realizing how complicated everything would become. And that's when I saw Ethan. He was talking to a couple of friends near the pier, and for a moment, I almost turned back. But he saw me first. His expression flickered. Surprise, hesitation, then something softer, almost like relief. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year, and yet, in that split second, all the rehearsed apologies and practiced speeches disappeared. He walked up slowly, hands in his pockets, and said, "Hey," just that. I smiled back, barely managing a quiet, "Hey." It was awkward, sure, but it was something. We talked about neutral things at first: work, family, life, like two people trying to remember how to be human again. Eventually, Michael joined us. He'd been helping set up the event with the veterans team, wearing a volunteer badge and that same gentle smile I'd fallen for in the first place. That air shifted the moment he approached, but Ethan didn't walk away this time. They exchanged a nod, the kind that carried years of tension, but also a hint of truce. There was silence for a few seconds before Ethan sighed and said, "You know, I used to come here thinking we'd never be able to stand in the same place again without hating each other." Michael looked at the water and replied quietly, "I never hated you." Ethan chuckled dryly. "Maybe you should have. Might have been easier." Then he turned to me and said something I'll never forget. "If he makes you happy, I won't stand in your way anymore." Just like that. No speeches, no tears, just an honest sentence that carried all the weight of forgiveness he'd been holding back for so long. My throat tightened, and before I could say anything, he added, "I still don't understand it, but maybe I don't need to. You're my sister. I want you to be okay." I felt tears sting my eyes, but I nodded, unable to speak. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come in grand gestures, it comes in quiet surrender. When someone decides they're done fighting, pain that only keeps them stuck. Later that evening, as the sun began to dip behind the lake, painting everything in gold and fire, I found myself sitting on the same old bench near the water. Michael joined me, his arm brushing lightly against mine. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful, filled with unspoken understanding. I watched his reflection in the water and thought about how much we'd both changed. We weren't the broken people from before. We were survivors who'd learned how to rebuild without pretending the cracks weren't there. He reached for my hand, and this time I didn't hesitate. The warmth of his fingers against mine felt like home. Steady, real, unafraid. I thought about all the people who had told me it wouldn't work. That love born from chaos never lasts. Maybe they were right about some things. We didn't have the perfect story or approval from everyone we cared about. But what we did have was choice to stay, to keep trying, to keep believing that love isn't about perfect timing or perfect people, but about finding someone who makes the wreckage worth surviving. As the last light faded over the lake, I leaned my head on his shoulder and whispered, "We made it." He smiled and said, "Barely." I laughed softly. Barely still counts. For the first time in forever, it felt like peace, not the fragile kind that you fear will vanish, but the kind that comes after you face the worst and realize you're still standing. Behind us, I heard Ethan's laughter, somewhere in the crowd, lighter than it had sounded in years, and it hit me that maybe forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about remembering it without letting it define you. That night, as the fireworks began over the water, I held Michael's hand a little tighter, not as my brother's best friend anymore, but as the man who'd walked through the storm with me and never stopped believing I was worth the calm that came after. Love, I realized, doesn't survive because it's easy. It survives because two people decide it's worth every scar, every silence, every broken piece they had to mend along the way. And in that moment, watching the reflection of the fireworks ripple across the lake, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. It was just the beginning of one built on truth, forgiveness, and a love that had finally survived the wreckage. The end.